darkness into light, nothing into breath. Once more, the darkness of the world was given flesh. Not by his own accord, but by the accord of others who wished to pay him tribute. The air here was different, however. Not the same Transylvanian air he was used to. Something in the air felt fresher, cleaner, less driven by the evil of the world. Immediately, the Prince of Darkness was appalled by it. The immortal blood in his veins boiled at the feeling. His wispy white hair draped down his back and stood on end. Slowly, the villain rose from his coffin. What perfect timing! All Hallows Eve. Stretching his back, Simon Belmont pushed his way out of his room. It was later in the morning. The poor man had overslept on accident. Luckily, because of some strange holiday occurring today, he was not expected to battle in the rings or battlefields today. He was tasked with relaxing and enjoying the festivities of the day. It sounded reasonable. However, something deep within Simon's gut told him that there was something wrong. Something immensely wrong. He couldn't place a finger on it, but deep within his chest he felt an odd lingering feeling. The pain of an open wound, long since healed, panged dully. It was a feeling he had long forgotten, and was immediately on edge because of its sudden resurgence. As Simon strutted down the hallway towards the nearest set of stairs, the door directly adjacent to his own creaked open. The figure of his great-great-grandson wandered out. A hand was clutched to his head. "Richter, my boy," Simon greeted, enthusiastic despite his jitteriness. "How do you do on such a fine day as today?" "I've been better," Richter muttered in return. He inhaled sharply, as a surge of pain hit him. "I've got this massive headache. Feels like something or someone's trying to get to my head." "I see," Simon mused, a hand gently running over his own affliction. Just a gentle brush of fingers against the scar tissue of his abdomen hurt. Simon clenched his teeth. "It appears the Belmont bloodline is suffering a low spot today." "Yeah. I guess you could say that," Richter shrugged, following in the footsteps of his ancestor. He, too, was on edge. He hadn't felt the kind of pain his head panged with since. "I'm certain we'll get over ourselves eventually," Simon mused merrily, trying to make light of his own growing anxieties about the day that was ahead. The dynamic duo met the stairs and started descending down to the main lobby. "For now, the two of us ought to stick together. I've got feelings about today." "You and me both, Simon," Richter muttered. "Maybe he ought to head to Dr. Mario for some headache medicine or something. I just hope that it's just that. Feelings. With two Belmonts and no Dracula, what could be wrong today?" Simon joyfully mused. At the mention of the Dark Count's name, however, both men cringed in pain. Blip, it seemed as if the Evil One's dark magic still had an effect on the two of them. "Of course," Richter said, as the two neared the main lobby. "It's certainly just superstitions, I'm sure. As the two men reached the bottom floor, all hell broke loose. Or, well, it appeared as if all hell had already broken loose. All around, their friends and colleagues were grotesquely mangled. Their faces had been contorted into vile monsters and creatures of darkness. Lucas's blonde locks had transformed into the head of a pig. Rosalina donned a traditional witch-white garment. Wario, scarfing down whole cloves of garlic, seemed to have transformed into none other than Dracula? Both Belmonts exclaimed. Without hesitation, both men reached for their legendary vampire killers.
"Die, monster!"
Richter shouted, cracking his whip suddenly at Wario. Stunned by this, Wario had no other option but to take the full blunt of the attack. "What did you do to Wario? Release him, you vile fiend. Free him." Wario bellowed out in pain, hopping up and down as the whips continued to crack in his direction. "Stop. Stop. Ouch. Ouchie. I''M.A. No monster. Stop. What is?" King Dedede tried to interject. The king had his large tummy opened up like a mouth. Not physically, no. That hurt like no one's business. He had decided to make himself up to look like the vile creature of his home world, complete with an eye in the center. He didn't get far, however. "King Dedede. He's gotten you too." Simon, dismayed, exclaimed. Without hesitation, he tossed a bottle of holy water at the penguin. "Be purified, beast. Cleanse yourself." Richter's eyes cut through the crowd of monsters to spy Lucina out of the corner of his eye. Across the way, by the punch table, he spotted her and her get-up. A black dress draped over her body, and a pair of horns poked out from under her blueberry hair. And suddenly he was back on the clock tower. Richter's voice echoed around the clock tower, as he spotted his beloved. His heart thumped like crazy, as he bounded up the stairs. With only the light of the full moon to guide his footsteps, the vampire hunter quickened his pace. She had been the main reason he set out on this journey to begin with. Having found Maria in an earlier part of the castle, she had informed him that her big sister was somewhere up ahead, and encouraged him to keep persisting. As he approached, however, he felt as if something was completely wrong. "Richter," she cried back to him, a shrill, haunting echo to her voice. "Don't come any closer." "Why not?" he asked, confused. His feet were moving without him telling him to. "Annette, I'm here. Fear not. Dracula has no hold on you anymore." "That's where you're wrong, you foolish Toma." Richter's taste decreased as his voice echoed around him. Atop the clock tower, the echoing felt unnatural, surreal. It sent a shiver through Richter's brain. "Richter, please. Stay away," Annette pleaded with him. "Show yourself, demon." Richter shouted to nothing in particular. "If you so wish." A gigantic skull appeared in the sky, slowly descending down toward the poor damsel. Bound by the ties that kept her there, Annette could do nothing to escape. Tears curled down her face, as she tried, in vain, to flee from the scene. In desperation, the blonde turned towards her beloved. "Richter, please, help me." Annette. Richter sprang into action, charging towards her. However, something stopped his assault. An invisible wall paused his movement. Try as he might to push forward, the Belmont couldn't break the powerful incantation. Again and again, he tried to dash forward, but again and again he was stopped in his tracks. Annette, realizing that there was nothing Richter could do to stop the falling skull, saw that she had little time left. The tears continued to fall from her face, as her fate was decided. "You'll never get away with this, coward," Richter yelled, desperately trying to push forward. To push through. To push to her. "Richter." Annette's voice was soft, the pleading and desperation gone from it. It caught Richter off his guard, and his eyes immediately turned towards hers. The pristine blue eyes were starting to sink with the red of the skull above. "I love you," she all but whispered to him. "No matter what happens, I'll always love you. Do you hear me?" Richter was at a loss for words, as the hopelessness of the situation got to him. If only he could cross the gap and free her. If only. "Richter, I'll never stop loving you. Do you hear me?" I do," Richter managed to express. Hot emotion was starting to bubble up within him. And I'll never stop. Stop loving you. Do you hear me?" Annette nodded. Suddenly, the skull was on her. With a shriek of pure agony, she began to transform into a lesser vampire. Richter's breath was gone at the sight of her and the traumatic memory. He had failed again. Everyone he cared about had been transformed into a horrific, disgusting monster. "Back, vile creature!" Simon shouted, beating Waluigi over the head with his own fists. "I said back. Back." Richter's fighting spirit was gone, as he locked eyes with Lucina. What was the point of fighting for self-preservation if everyone he ever cared about transformed into a hideous being of the night? Slowly, he lowered his weapon to the floor, before slumping down. He didn't care anymore. "What part of back do you not understand?" Simon said, continuing to beat Waluigi. "I just OF exclamation mark wanted some punch." Waluigi bellowed, covering his face with his hands. The poor, lanky plumber wasn't even dressed up or anything. He just wanted to celebrate the party without dressing up. "I'll give you some punch, monster," Simon shouted. "Richter." Lucina called again, actively pushing her way through the cowering crowd. Richter had slumped below all of the other dressed-up tenants and was currently resting alongside the wall. Her own feelings of pain and sadness were out the window as she pushed towards Richter's side. "Richter, what in Nug's name is wrong? If you're here to do me in, monster, do it quickly," Richter mumbled, ironic. "The hands of the friend I held most dearly will be the one to end my tale." "What are you talking about?" Lucina exclaimed, flabbergasted. Suddenly, it clicked with her. The Belmonts didn't know what Halloween is. "You fight like a baby girl." Simon laughed, as he suplexed Waluigi. Decorations and other partiers flew out of the way as Simon threw the poor man around. Lucina slowly removed the headband she had in her hair, before placing it on the ground. "Richter." Richter pushed himself against the wall, wide eyes on the young woman who was so close to him. "I know this is another trick. I won't fall for it. You." "It's a costume, Richter," Lucina assured, moving to follow him upward. "All of this is fake. Just for fun. Pretend. It's Halloween." "Hello Havno?" Richter asked. Mark, dressed in a red suit and sunglasses, pushed his way out and onto the floor. Smashers were cowering as Simon fought ever-living demon within the surrounding area. What in the Sam hell is going on here?
Incineroar!
Incineroar exclaimed, upon seeing Mark dressed up as his worst enemy. The fire cat was prowling through the crowd with intent to kill. Even in his oversized pink sweatsuit, the cat was intimidating. Halloween, Lucina told Richter. It's the one night a year that everyone comes together to celebrate the scarier side of life. It's all for fun. When I first came here, I, too, was confused. But it's grown on me. I don't like this, Richter muttered. Another sudden surge of pain hit his head. It seemed to be growing stronger. He inhaled deeply through his mouth, as he forced himself away from her. I need to leave. Something's wrong. Suddenly, all the lights went out. The Halloween party was officially derailed. As the lights went out, a surprised shout escaped most of the patrons. A few people laughed, as they believed this was all part of the act. Even Simon stopped beating the hell out of Waluigi long enough to look around to see just what the heck was going on here. Mark? Bayonetta asked, a raised eyebrow audible in her voice. Her usual snark was all there. This is one lame party trick. Turning off the lights during a Halloween party? I've seen worse done at children's birthday parties. And how often do you attend those? Sheik asked, a raised eyebrow audible in her voice. Bayonetta rolled her eyes in the darkness. I'd offer a baseless compliment on your costume right now if I could see what it was. This wasn't me, Mark's voice suddenly said through the crowd. Feeling around, Mark knocked over a handful of things that were on a nearby table. Clumsily, the Lord tried to find his way towards his office. His brother would know what was going on. Maybe it's just a problem with the fuse box. Or one of the interns is playing a trick on us. Wouldn't it be a shame if some senseless slasher came through here and relentlessly murdered us all? A raspy voice cut through the crowd. The snarl in the purple space bastard's voice was enough to stand anyone's hair on end. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. I'd bet he derived some sick kind of pleasure from sticking the knife through our backs or chests. Lucas was terrified by Ridley's words. Shaking, the young boy managed to find Rosalina's leg and squeezed tightly. Rosalina was nearly rocked off her frame by the boy's ricocheting. Pichu! Pichu exclaimed happily, nibbling at a berry. It was utterly unfazed by the words of the dragon it was perched upon. Please, Ridley, let's not do this, Rosalina chided. There's no need to sow discourse for no reason. Why yeah. Papa spoke up, hugging his sister close. That's just mean. Nana added. Ridley's glowing orange eyes were visible even through the darkness. He wore a shit-eating grin that no one could see. Oh, he loved being him. Haven't you heard? It's happened before. Right here in this very hotel, many years ago, a murder took place. Multiple murders. It was a murder fest. That's why you hear the occasional moaning in the hallways when you're walking to your room late at night. Don't say anything, Mutwo hastily shot at King Dedede, giving the big king an evil eye. Ness looked towards the sound of Dedede trying to keep his laughter inside of him. What could be so funny? I swear to Arceus, if you do, I will. I just thought that was Wario trying to put on his socks, Sam spoke up, with a shrug. King Dedede burst out laughing, patting his large belly. The sound echoed around the rather small lobby and released some of the tension of standing around in the dark, waiting for the lights to come back on. Some who waited, however, were less than patient. Mark? When the hell are you gonna get the lights back on? Dr. Mario huffed. Jigglypuff rode atop his shoulder. The sudden lights out was making the balloon Pokemon quite drowsy. I''m.m.a. Missing the fluorescent light bulbs burning my eyeballs. I am getting there. Mark shouted back, before tripping over a chair. Dr. Mario sighed. I shoulda never come to this stupid party. Suddenly, a scream broke through the crowd. A feminine scream. High and grating. The sound of a scuffle followed before the screaming was silenced, and suddenly, there was nothing. What the heck was that? Who screamed? What's touching my leg? Dedede, stop screaming. Chaos was breaking out, as the nerves skyrocketed again. Something fishy was going on here. Just like that, the lights came back. Okay. Who's the funny guy? Pac-Man asked, looking around at his fellow friends. The Bane of Ghosts, dressed up in a white sheet, ironically, was taking the whole situation rather lightly. Last time I checked, we were in the hotel lobby. This doesn't look anything like what it looked like a few minutes ago. Confused by Pac-Man's words, the other Smashers turned around to spot what the yellow man was talking about. Much to their surprise, the entire lobby seemed to come straight out of a silent film. Creaky boards replaced the tile floor that they were accustomed to. Dust and dirt were everywhere. Cobwebs decorated and dominated much of the upper layer. Ominous sets of stairs branched upward into the darkness. And all known electricity was replaced by candlesticks, which painted the whole floor in an eerie light. "Yeah, good one, Mark," little Max said, rolling his eyes. Gently, he tossed a tuft of incineroar-like fur out of his face. "You got the hotel staff to change up the whole place while the lights were out. I'm impressed. Everything here seems almost lifelike." Aye. Mark yawned, aghast. He moved to stand, adjusting the sunglasses that covered his eyes, before taking them off. This wasn't me. "Hello, Lucina?" came Richter's panicked voice as he realized the Princess of This was nowhere to be seen. "Lucina? Lucina, where'd you go?" The crowd was silenced as everyone looked among their numbers to find her. The search was fruitless. Anxious, Richter ran a hand through his chocolate brown hair. "When the lights went out, she was right next to me. Where are you?" A sudden shot of pain went through Richter's head. The sudden pain made him double over, reeling from the feeling. It was as if someone had punched him in the gut if his gut was located in his forehead. Simon, too, suddenly doubled over in pain. It felt as if his entire side was being torn open again. Bayonetta was quick to come to his side and offer comfort, but even her gentle, loving touches sent pain through him. A sudden realization hit both Belmonts. Their eyes rose briefly and they made eye contact. Dracula was back. Eula. Darkness. The world was in darkness. She fought against the darkness. A restless sleep. Suddenly, like bursting through an open window, Lucina's eyes were thrown wide open. Her breath was heavy and her position was uncomfortable. But she was awake. Disoriented, the warrior princess couldn't make out where she was. All she could make out through the blurry vision was that there was a man, no, a thing seated before her. "Good morning, oh princess." The tone was intimidating but smooth to the ears. Her fight or flight reactions were triggered. Like a cornered hen in a henhouse, Lucina moved to attack the one before her, reaching for her sword. But something kept her back. Metal chains held Lucina in place. Again and again, she tried to lunge forward. Her stupid state disallowed her to realize she was bound to the wall and completely at the mercy of whoever was before her. She shot forward again and again, but was unable to move. "Please," the monster said, casually. There was something in his hand. A wine glass, perhaps? A potion? She couldn't tell. "It's pointless, my dear. I'll get you." Lucina slurred. Slowly, her senses were coming back to her. Her eyes were adjusting to the low candlelight of the room, and whatever was before her was coming into clearer view. "I'm sure," the Prince of Evil mused, a finger resting on his temple. "Just like they always do. The unlikely hero of the story manages to find a way out of the grasp of the cruel hand of fate. Alas, my dear, that won't be you." Slowly, the figure began to rise from his throne. "Do you have any idea who I am?" A wave of fear hit Lucina's heart at the question. As if she were suddenly dunked into cold water, Lucina's senses rushed back to her like a lost puppy. For the first time since she'd awoken, she'd gotten a good look at her captor. His face was as pale as the moon, and his eyes showed no emotion or light of any kind. The window to the soul was completely empty. As the soul was something the great count lacked. A long, flowing cape draped his shoulders, and his red garb contrasted the golden highlights of his suit. His wispy white hair waterfalled down his back like a milky waterfall, and was repulsive to look at. Lucina was too filled with fear to speak up. "I'll take your silence as a yes," Dracula hummed. I won't. I'm not going to join you," Lucina exclaimed. Again, she moved to strike, but was held back by her restraints. "Richter warned me about you. About your evil deeds. I won't. I won't join your Legion of the Night." "It's funny how you think you have a choice," Dracula spoke, a gloved hand running across Lucina's neck. It caused her to tense up. His flesh was as cold as his heart. "Don't you worry. I don't wish to harm a single hair on your pretty little head, Lucina. I only really have a grudge against a few certain individuals. You're just the bait I need for them to come crawling to me. Once they take the bait, they'll be done away with." Ominously, lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the room with its white light. Lucina looked up at the vampire with complete disdain in her eyes. "You won't do anything of the sort," Lucina shouted. "The hands'll get you." Dracula laughed. A dry, humorless laugh. "Please. I've done away with them. They were my first targets. Easy, too. They never did see it coming. If you can't handle one Belmont, what makes you think you can handle two?" Lucina scoffed, before spitting at Dracula. It hit him directly on the shoe. The evil prince offered a crooked look. "I've got my methods, dear Lucina. But I believe we ought to know each other a little better first. Care for a drink?" Dracula held up a wine glass in his hand. However, what was inside it was anything but wine. With the texture of tar and the color of blood, the tonic in Dracula's hand made Lucina's stomach retch. "I'm too young to drink, thank you," Lucina spouted out. "It'll be our little secret," Dracula told her. "In fact, I think if you drink it, you'll be able to see things from my perspective a little better." 2 and 2 clicked in Lucina's mind. "I won't drink it," she shouted. Dracula was approaching. Slowly, he placed one foot in front of the other. His eyes stared through her soul and nearly coaxed it to come out and become his little plaything. Lucina clenched her lips tightly together, but Dracula's pace didn't slow. "Please, your defiance is fruitless," Dracula told her, before grabbing her cheeks and lifting upward. Try as she might to keep her mouth shut, Dracula forced it open with his heavy prodding. Lucina protested, shaking her head to avoid drinking even a drop of the vile substance. Another crack of lightning was followed by a scream, as the drink was forced down her throat. "So let me get this straight. None of this is fake? You aren't trying to dupe us?" Pac-Man stared at Mark, unbelieving. The yellow man had abandoned his ghost costume to get a better look at the one who he was accusing. He wasn't the only one not buying the prospect offered to them. Something about being suddenly in Dracula's haunted castle seemed too incredulous to be true. "I'm not kidding," Mark told them, worriedly running a hand through his hair. It was a nervous habit of his. How would I be able to not only untile the floor and apply all this creaky wood in the brief few moments that the lights were out? "He's got a point," Ridley mused. "It doesn't make any logical sense. None of this does. But at this point, I've just come to realize that, wherever we are, trouble follows." Ridley was right. There could only be one logical solution. "Who gave you the brain cell?" Little Mac asked. Ridley rolled his eyes. "My head is shaped like this for a reason." "Well, where are we, then?" she asked what the whole group was thinking. Idly, she ran a hand across a wall. Inspecting her fingers, they were laden with dust. Seemingly disgusted, the princess in disguise wiped it away on her stealth suit. "Wherever we are, it hasn't been inhabited in a while. How and why were we even transported here?" King Dedede, placing a gloved hand on his beak, inspected what he saw, which, in the dull candlelight that barely sprayed any light anywhere, began to speak. "In my humble opinion, this place ain't looking too much better than Castle Dedede after that weird thing I did with them big arms of mine." "A castle," Newtwo communicated. Floating idly along, the genetic Pokemon seemed to be analyzing and overanalyzing everything around him. His eye glinted shades of green, purple, and red as he thought deeply. If nothing else, that's one thing Dedede's contributed to today's events. We've got to be in a castle. How? Lucas asked, his brows upturned. The young child didn't much care for this scary turn of events. "Some bullshit magic. That's how," Ridley explained. "Really? Language?" Rosalina scolded. Ridley rolled his eyes, before switching languages. "Goddamn magical bullshit. That doesn't help." Rosalina gasped. "Would you like Spanish?" Ridley all but growled. "Because either way, we can't dance around the fact that that's how we all got here. Someone brought us here for a reason. Maybe it was the murderous psychopath I mentioned earlier that found a book of spells. The fuck if I know. I'm not psychic." "I am," Newtwo offered. "But it offers no help. Something about this place is off-putting." "Bah, whatever," Dr. Mario mused, pulling up his red rubber gloves. "You think you can fool old Doc like that, don't you? Try and scare me just because I don't get out at a clinic all that much. Nice try, but you can't fool me. I listen to public radio." "What does that have to do with anything?" Ridley asked. "What I''M.M.A. saying is that there's no way any of this is real," Dr. Mario said, waving his hand. Jigglypuff was wide awake at this point, listening intently to what the doctor had to say and not comprehending any of it. "This is just another spook house or something like that. You know what? I'll humor you. I''M.M.A. Go find the exit." Doc, turning on his heel, didn't even look back at the others. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his flowing white coat and popped out a potion. Flicking up the lid, the doctor continued off into the darkness towards untold horrors with Jigglypuff riding high and mighty up on his shoulder. "He's a god at point," Wario exclaimed. I''M.M.A. Not gonna sit here and be made a clown. Wario ain't no clown. He's a vampire, and I''M.M.A. running low on garlic. Come on, Waluigi. Let's say blow this popsicle stand. Yeah. Waluigi agreed, giving the others a rude gesture, following after his portly partner in crime. Wario had started walking down the hallway that Dr. Mario had gone. Wait. Nana called out, suddenly stricken with fear. We can't split up. Don't you remember what happened last time? Wario froze for a moment, as he remembered what had happened. Spiders. Disgusted, Wario returned to the group. Waluigi, however, rolled his eyes. Bah, pansy. Waluigi's gonna find the way out, and then you're all gonna be sorry. With that, Waluigi turned around the corner and away from the group, following after Doc and Puff. No. Nana shouted. See, come back. The little ice climber was about ready to bolt after the two of them before a hand on her shoulder stopped her. She gave her an eye from beneath the cowl, before nodding. I'll go after them and make sure they don't get hurt. You stay here with the group where it's safe. Readying her needles, Sheik dashed after the three yahoos who thought to leave the group in a horror environment was the best idea they had. What happened last time? Was there a last time? Has that vile count been in this dimension beforehand? Simon asked, readying his whip. Blasted bastard. I'll kill him a third time if it comes to it. With two Belmonts present within the walls of this disgusting excuse for a castle, Dracula stands not a chance. While Simon was ready to embark on another adventure headfirst, Richter looked as if he had seen a ghost. His face was pale and he felt a sickening feeling in both his heart and his chest, as all the horrid abominations that Lucina could be transformed into before his very eyes danced through his mind. Are you quite alright, Richter? Bayonetta asked, concerned for Simon's descendant clearing her voice. We've got to hurry, Richter managed to mumble out. He wasn't usually the cowardly type. Far from it. But being back here in Dracula's castle was bringing back some memories that Richter wished he could forget. He's got my friend. I'll always love you, Richter. Bayonetta laid a hand on Richter's shoulder. We'll find Lucina, wherever she is, Bayonetta reassured him, giving the poor young man a squeeze to the shoulder. We've got the right people for the job. And learned our lesson about splitting up. An undead creature of the night. Die monster. Simon's voice cut through the air like a whip. Before the sound of a whip also cut the air. Everyone in the clump jumped at the sound. Dude, chill out. It's just me, Sans, my apologies, my dearest skeleton friend. Usually when I see skeletons, they're throwing bones at me and it's rather frustrating. Sans shrugged. Hey, I don't got a bone to pick with you. We're on the same team. Cute makeup session, ladies, Ridley grumbled. But this doesn't help us get to where we're going. If we're going to kick some vampiric ass, which way do we go? There was silence among the group, as each person present considered the possible solution to the situation they had at hand. Slowly, however, their eyes all gradually turned towards the staircase to their immediate left. Terrified of what was to come, Lucas hugged Rosalina's leg, and Ness did the same to King Badid. Popo and Nana hugged each other. Ominously, like a painting with eyes that followed one's movement, the stairs called to them. There was only one way up. Max took a sip from his coffee cup as he stared out the window. The sky had gone an ominous shade of fucking terrifying. Something was brewing out there, and Max knew exactly what it was. Not but 80 yards away, a second hotel seemed to have sprung up out of nowhere. A looking, black building that mimicked the shape and size of Smash's own monument. It was quite striking to see just how similar Dracula's design was to the design of the hands this go around. Most others had either not noticed this shift in the sky, or had noticed and were currently freaking out. That color in the sky was never a good thing, especially not during All Hallows Eve. Max, however, was not worried. Why should I be? The red sweets menace to society mused. Swiftly, he kicked his feet up and onto Mark's desk, leaning backward in the chair he sat in. I've got plot armor for days. Without a care in the world, Max sipped at his warm drink as the Dracula's legion of the undead set siege to the hotel. Humming gently to himself, Dr. Mario walked down the dimly lit hallway. Draining the rest of his potion, the doctor placed the flask back into his pocket and continued to walk on as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Waluigi strode by his side, observing all of the things that could, and would, go bump in the night. Jigglypuff was going enough worrying for the three of them combined. Bah, Puff, there's no need to be afraid. Dr. Mario mused, petting his puffy companion. All of this stuff is just a spook house. A fake. The only thing you've gotta worry about is Waluigi. Hey. The purple plumber huffed. I''M.M.A. Not that scary. But even Pitch who could be a monster compared to this stuff. What is this? Amateur hour? That a mummy is obviously toilet paper. Waluigi pointed ahead dramatically. Before the three of them, plus Sheep, who stealthily strode behind them, stood a real, live, walking undead creature of the night. Eerily, it groaned. To most sane people, it would have sent them running away. These were not sane people. Bah-ha-ha-ha-ha. Doc laughed, bending over double. The mummy took a swipe at him, but missed on account of Doc's shorter stature. Jigglypuff, frightened of the terrifying creature before her, hugged tighter to Doc. Looky here. This bozo thinks he can scare us. Waluigi, too, was cackling like a madman at the sight of the mummy. Wah-ha-ha-ha. Where'd you get the costume, Stinky? The toilet's door? The mummy swiped at Waluigi, missing his head by mere inches. Damn, their laughing was making the mummy miss its mark. Jigglypuff Briar, huffing Doc tighter. Suddenly, a barrage of needles hit the mummy square in the chest. Doc and Waluigi were too busy cackling in the face of danger to see or care where they came from. In a mere matter of seconds, the mummy was no more. Ha! Look at there. Little baby couldn't handle us. Doc said, striking a heroic pose. Once more, he and his lanky partner cackled. You know? You ain't so bad, Waluigi. Nah, and you ain't bad yourself. Waluigi grinned. Come on. We've got a lot of ground to cover. The three amigos continued on, with Sheep lingering behind. Deeply, she sighed to herself, before stealthily following. This job was going to be harder than she thought. The group had managed to climb the stairs, leading them to a long, winding hallway. No supernatural occurrences had appeared yet. But Simon and Richter were certain that they'd be right around the corner. Be alert. Simon commanded, holding his whip tightly. Any moment now, one of Dracula's fierce minions may appear to convert you to the darkness. Be alert, my friends. Keep keenly to your senses. If needed, I'll blindly throw myself forward, axes and holy water blazing. Bayonetta clicked her tongue, a small, almost unnoticeable smile gracing her lips. Isn't he just the bravest? In a psychopathic way, yes, Ridley remarked, rolling his eyes. If it weren't for Pitch who perched atop his high shoulder, the space pirate would be right up front with the others. Unfortunately, there was a baby on board, and he had to be as careful as a mother with her first child. I think it's endearing, Bayonetta remarked. No time for banter. Rosalina reminded. The space princess was entirely focused on their goal. They needed to get out of here alive and well. We've got a mission to do. We can't get caught up in idle chatter. Why so serious, princess? Wario asked, scratching at his backside. The vampire costume was starting to ride up in places he didn't quite like. It's not like the world is ending. Rosalina had the portly vampire glare. It wasn't often she glared. But in this situation, it seemed, was of vital importance. Lucas, terrified, was clinging to her dress. Wario shut up immediately. We'll be a-okay, okay? King Dedede assured. Ain't that right, Mutwo? Chances of success are at a high 9.6%, Mutwo answered. We're most likely going to die at the hands of a fairy tale. See? We'll be fine. Dedede assured, patting Ness on the back. Ya hear that? Oh okay, Ness said, trying to sound tough. That's the spirit, King Dedede exclaimed. H.A.? Nana muttered, terror in her voice. She moved to grab at the leg of the closest adult. That adult just so happened to be Mark. Mark, as gently as he could, reached down to offer her some sort of comfort. Nana, however, upon realizing just who it was, hastily backed away. Mark opened his mouth to say something, but decided it was better to stay silent. Soon enough, however, he saw just what it was that had made Nana start up. Platforming? Little Mac exclaimed. He was right. Ahead of them, numerous, precarious platforms rose from a never-ending abyss. Creatures of the undead army stood, readying their weapons for their new guests. Richter held tightly to his axe. Simon grabbed for his holy water. Incineroar brandished his claws. Just like back home, Richter sighed to himself. Who is your master? The question hung in the air for a moment. Dracula sat in his throne, tapping a finger against the armrest. His head rested on the other fist, as the king of demons stared soullessly at the one who had become his prized pawn. I asked you a question, Temptress. Who is your master? Lucina stared ahead at the vampire. Her skin had paled to a papery color and texture, and her eyes sagged in. She wasn't feeling anything. It was as if her soul had been taken from her body by the vile count that stood before her, looking at her with a mocking gaze. The Temptress's eyes rose to meet the other. I am at your service, Dracula, the swordwoman said with a bow. The answer pleased Dracula. A sinister snarly smile curled at his lips. Wonderful. I think you are ready. Content. Terry sat in the lobby with his hat covering his eyes. Today had been a big day for the lone wolf, and he was ready to just sit around and do absolutely nothing. Sure, Halloween was fun and all, but the king of fighters was exhausted from power dunking his toaster pastries in the toaster and busting Wolf in poker. Happily, Terry tapped his foot again the ground. It was a good day so far. Derek. Buddy. How's it going? Ken's voice sailed through the air and caught the attention of the other dad. Pushing his hat, and a good chunk of blonde hair, out of his eyes, Terry's blue hues landed right on the red gooey wearing martial artist. Ken. Terry grinned at the sight of his friend. Happily, he stood to give the other a firm handshake. Long time no see, pal. What's new for you? Ken shrugged. Not too much. Just got done with yoga for the day. Really helps stretch out the old bones, you know? Terry laughed, waving a hand at the other. Oh, I know. Blue Mary's been trying to get me to do it so that I don't lose all of my flexibility, right? Was there ever any to begin with? Ken jabbed, grinning like an idiot. Of course. I can touch my toes and lift my foot above my head. Can you do that? Ken shot Terry with a big thumbs up and a cheesy smile. Okay. That doesn't make any sense. Are you okay? Terry questioned. The two men burst out laughing, slapping each other on the shoulder. Terry was just starting to get settled into Smash, and Ken and Rib being here really helped. What's going on over here? A meeting of extraordinary gentlemen that no one invited me to? Both men's heads turned to see who had addressed them. The Prince of Lis, Kron, strode up beside them, wearing a smile similar to their own. Oh no, he's figured us out. Terry joked. Musta lost the invite in the mail. Sorry bud, you're not allowed. Ken jabbed, slapping Kron on the shoulder. How the heck are you doing, pal? Oh, you know. Another day another dollar, Kron shrugged. You guys are getting paid? Terry asked. Shoot, where do I sign on? Again, laughter rang out among the three of them. The day was filled with an air of camaraderie. Oh, what a day to be alive. If Dracula had anything to say about it, though, they wouldn't be for long. Suddenly, the windows behind the three of them shattered, spilling glass shards all over the backsides of all the dads. A shocked shout went up among the three of them, as Kron grabbed for his trusty sword. What in the world? Ken started, before instinctively ducking as a bone was thrown in his direction. A rush of heat hit his face as something dashed an end above his head. Guys? Terry exclaimed, pointing outside. There was a hint of fear in his voice as he gazed out the, now broken, windows. An army of Dracula's dark creatures stared back. Skeletons, demons, succubuses, and gloom, as far as the eye could see, marched ominously towards the onlookers. Oh crap, Terry muttered aloud. And then IA says, where'd you get the baboon fetus? You should have seen the look on his face. Doc and Waluigi were nearly in stitches as they wandered the vast hallways of this Hotel Vania. It was like a labyrinth, but neither man cared. They were having too much fun chumming it up to care at all about the dangers all around them. Jigglypuff rode atop Doc's shoulder. She was still cautious of her surroundings but was beginning to loosen up by the minute. If Dr. Mario wasn't worried, why should she be? Waluigi couldn't breathe. He was sure his face was going red from all the laughing he was doing. Happily, he pounded his fist into his knee. Wahahaha. Oh hey boy, I wanna see his reaction. Did you get it on tape? Doc paused, you know? It might be in the security camera archives. Once we get out of this spook house, I'll dig for it for ya hear? Waluigi grinned to his friend. He could feel himself warming up to the doctor who had so mistreated him in the past. That sounds like my kinda afternoon. Sheik was growing tired of this job. The two dunderheads kept pushing along through the danger like a chicken walking along a train track. She couldn't count the number of monsters she'd slain to save their skins. At this point, it was starting to get ridiculous. How could they think any of this was fake when Waluigi had actually destroyed a haunted set of armor on accident? It moved on its own. However, she knew she couldn't let her comrades fall, even if they were complete idiots. Breathing inwardly to herself, the ninja continued stalking along. Waluigi, look. Dr. Mario pointed right ahead. A whole turkey on a silver platter laid directly before the two of them and gave off a delicious aroma. All three stomachs growled with the exception of Sheik, who couldn't smell the delicious bird from where she stood on the wall. Jigglypuff. Jigglypuff exclaimed, her eyes as round as saucers. Oh, it looked so delicious. Dibs. Waluigi called, before rushing forward. Dr. Mario stuck an arm out, however, to stop the purple, lanky man's approach. What? In my medical opinion, it isn't the best idea to eat random food you find laying around dingy spook houses, Dr. Mario lectured. Oh. Both Waluigi and Puff complained, crossing their arms and pouting. Oh, bub. You didn't let me finish. Doc told them, raising a finger. What I was trying to say is that it's no good to eat them in spook houses. Without sharing. That was something the rest of them could get behind. Eagerly and greedily, the three competitors darted ahead to the conspicuous turkey dinner. As Waluigi bent down to pick it up, he brought his head up too fast and bumped a book on a bookcase right before him. What the yeah? Mamma mia! Jigaloo! With a startled yelp each, the floor gave way underneath, and the three of them were plunged down a sprawling, metal slide. Sheik, noticing this, darted ahead to try and accompany them. But was too late. They were gone. Right from under her fingers. Oh dear goddesses, Sheik thought to herself, looking around the deserted hallways. She was all alone. And no way. No. I can't. I'm not one of you stupid platformers. I'll die. Little Mac was freaking out. The challenge set before them seemed rather straightforward. A set of platforms hung precariously over a seemingly never-ending pit. Skeletons and demons of all sorts of shapes and sizes sat, awaiting their approach. They had their reasons. Dracula's special instructions were to allow no one man, Pokemon, or other to cross the gap. They needed to pose the Count in his time of plotting and planning. Bones and blood were ready to be flung to stop them from progressing. Nonsense. Pac-Man reassured, slapping the kid on the back. Platforming is easy. I never used to be a platformer either, until I grew arms and legs and a face. Then I was up and out there platforming with the best of them. Wings are helpful, Ridley told the boy. And so is puffing your chest out and sucking in all kinds of air. Digit instructed, puffing out his large chest as an example. I am just a regular guy. Little Mac protested. I can't make that jump. The first jump was approximately 4 feet. A simple hop would have cleared it for most people. Please, kid, don't be such a baby, Sans assured Mac. The skeleton's permanent smile was turned towards the short boxer, and his hands were tucked gently into his pockets. What's wrong? Don't got the guts to do it? Not funny. Little Mac groaned. Watch and learn, my friend. Simon boomed. Taking his whip, he cracked it up and towards the ceiling. It latched onto a convenient handle. A tug reassured Simon that the weight of his body wouldn't cause the whole support beam to fall over. Running backward, he jumped in the air and allowed gravity to do the work for him. Kicking his feet outward, he landed a square kick to the jaw to one of the enemy skeletons. With a pained sound, the skeleton fell down into the abyss. A demon dove at Simon's blonde head of hair. However, the whip-wielding warrior ducked with a trained skill that few had. Swinging his vampire killer upward, he caught the purple imp right in the jaw. With a screech, he disappeared into nothingness. See? It's quite easy. A little mean to the skeletons, don't you think? I don't think they had a bone to pick with you, Sans jested, winking. This is no time for jokes. Little Mac whined. I'm just trying to lighten the mood, Mopey, Sans sighed. Watch, I'll go next. Grabbing onto his trust Gaster Blaster, Sans made the first jump rather seamlessly. Then, he made another, before sitting down. Phew, that was a workout. You're making a big deal out of nothing, Newtmore told him, before floating along and over the pit. It's actually pathetic. That's easy for you to say. Little Mac groaned. I can't jump, and I'm hardly 5 feet tall. I'm gonna die. You won't die, Bayonetta told him, before taking her leaps ahead. At least, not right away. You'll fall for a long, long time, before dying. Reassuring, Mac huffed, crossing his arms. He was about to bring up another point before he was lifted up and off of his feet by a furry set of paws. Hey, what in the... Sriracha? What are why? Spinning Mac around in a circle, Incineroar tossed the boxer ahead. The speed of his body smacked into the side of a skeleton who was aiming to harm Wario, effectively stopping the attack in progress. Little Mac hit the wall, and slid down it, landing dangerously close to the edge. Incineroar cried out, before beginning his dangerous trek across the precarious platforms. Lucas and Ness hopped in tandem. Rosalina and Mudwo floated over the pit. Nana and Popo put their mountain climbing skills to good use, using a tag team system to ensure neither of them would fall. Eventually, it was Mark and Richter left to make their moves. Together, Mark offered, sticking his hand out to the other man. Richter offered a nod, his head up in the clouds. Much like his ancestor, he looked towards the hook above them. Together, Richter grabbed Mark's hand, and the duo swung across the gap. Mark was surprisingly heavy for the kind of build he had. Maybe the clothes he wore hid his actual frame better than Richter thought. He was meant to be the protector of the Reset Temple, after all. A little godly meddling wasn't out of the question. Landing on a new platform, Mark and Richter immediately began to put a smackdown on the vile creatures that blocked their path. Mark, having forgotten his sword, used bare knuckles to lay the blade onto a group of skeletons. Richter whipped and kicked away other creatures of the night.
Scatter or fall!
A hit knocked Richter squarely off balance. He nearly fell off the platform. But luckily, Mark was right there for him. With a nod, the dynamic duo continued on. Die, cretins. Allow us to continue. Simon was laying quite the smackdown on an army of skeletons throwing bones. There were quite a number of them, but the old man was handling quite well. However, as the assault continued, it became very apparent that he was being overwhelmed. Grunting, Simon took a hit. Then, another. Then, another. He whipped and crossed, but it seemed fruitless. Suddenly, a giant foot stomped down from the heavens. Or, well, the hells. The skeletons were sent flying, as Bayonetta appeared beside her significant other. The only one who gets to give him that treatment is me, she informed them. Simon's face was bleeding, but not too badly. Gently, Bayonetta ran a finger across the wound. That's going to leave a scar. You know what they say, though, don't you? Simon asked, a smile coming to his face. Boy, was he grateful to see her. Bones heal. Hair grows back. Bayonetta caught on. She let out a chuckle, and scars look badass. You've got that right. Simon chuckled. A bone was flung against the wall behind them, narrowly missing the two of them. Simon shook a fist at the culprit. Hey, I'm the only one who gets to bone her. Bayonetta's face flushed a deep red. She didn't think he knew what that meant. But, as he swung into action, she couldn't help but feel as if she'd rub off on him in one way or another. King Dedede whacked a demon out of the air. Ness shot a park fire at a group of floating heads. Popo and Nana smacked a mimic to death and off the edge. The end's in sight, Mutwo informed the others, tossing away a group of monsters. That Dracula has no idea what he's in for. Oh, don't I? The voice sent a shiver through everyone's spines. It was cold and unfeeling, yet harsh and authoritarian. Dracula. Simon and Richter screamed out, fresh pain flaring up through both of their bodies. Following this pain, anger followed. Show yourself, demon. Wow, really quick. You can tell they're from the same tree. Where is Lucina? Richter shouted. I'll kill you, bastard. Please. You haven't a chance. Did you think it was going to be this easy? The platforms the Smasher stood on began to wobble. Little Mac let out a high, girly scream, clinging tightly to Incineroar's leg. You've got no power in this realm, Mutwo communicated, annoyance in his voice. Stop causing this trouble and we may let you live.
Ha! Mankind! A cesspit of hatred and lies!
Mankind ill needs a savior such as you.
Richter shouted. There was the glint of an eye at the end of the hallway. Until you are saying you say that, how could Warrior change sides when Shaft was involved? Shaft was an evil trick, and you know it. Richter shouted before his headache flared up again. The feeling of the rocking platform didn't help. Dracula sounded bored. So be it. If you won't do this the easy way, Dracula flicked his cape out like the dramatic bastard he was. We'll play by a different set of rules. Gravity tightened in the room, as Dracula closed his fist. Really, Pichu, Mutwo, and Rosalina were plunged deep into the pit. Mama! Lucas cried out, watching Rosalina fall. Her scream echoed all around, along with Ridley's screech. Suddenly, the platforms gave out. The rest of the cast fell down, down, down. Dracula smiled soullessly at his work, before turning around to return to his throne room. Welcome to your worst nightmares. The hotel was under attack. As far as the eye could see, a legion of Dracula's minions assaulted the hotel at the command of the Dark Lord. Windows were broken. Doors were kicked off their hinges. Walls were plowed through. All of this was in order to decimate anyone who dared oppose Count Dracula in his time of power. Humanity needed to be cleansed, and who better to do it than the Lord of Darkness himself? It was in humanity's better interest to do so. We can't stay here. There's too many of them. Female Robin's voice rang out, gathering the attention of her ragtag group of sudden resistance fighters. caught completely off guard by the surmounting opposition. None of those gathered were in the greatest form or gear to fight off an army of this caliber. Though, she'd been in this place before, hadn't she? Faced with odds that should be impossible, and trusted with the lives of those around her that she couldn't live herself without? Oh gods, it was just like an army of the risen. Casting arc fire, Robin fended a witch away from hero King Mark, who was tending to a wound that Crumb had received in his fight to gather more smashers to safety. The gash in Crumb's arm looked rather bad, but nothing a little time and recovery couldn't fix. If they made it out of here alive. What do you suggest we do? Terry exclaimed, smacking a power wave at a few dozen skeletons. It did little to fend them off. More and more, the bony bastards continued to approach. Just barely did Terry avoid a bone being tossed in his direction. Did everyone get an introduction to Smash like this? Suddenly, a loud set of roaring exploded into the ears of a few gathered. In a matter of moments, 2 silver dragons plowed through a weak spot in the opposition's line, barreling right towards the few resistance fighters that had managed to group up. Dragons! Marth shouted, taking a defensive stance. Drawing his weapon, the King of Heroes prepared himself for the fight of a century. Please. Don't hurt them. Female Robin exclaimed. She would recognize those 2 dragons anywhere. Karin? Crumb asked, before correcting himself. Well, Corins? He was right. The 2 royal dragons made it into the group hardly clinging to their dragon forms. Open wounds decorated the outsides of their bodies, as arrows and magic spells battered their dragonic forms. We can't just stand here and wait to die, Ken shouted, taking over. The hallway they were holed up in was no good for defense. They could be attacked from every angle. Forward, backward, and even ahead by those terrifying flying heads. Quickly, Ken hooked a thumb behind himself. Let's get out of here. There's gotta be a secret exit or something, and we can gather others. We gotta get something to help the Corins. Great idea, Ken. Terry complimented, suplexing a witch and sending it back to whatever hellhole it had crawled out of. You heard the man. We gotta get moving on. Move they did. Taking all they could, the ragtag team hurried down the hallway toward the middle of the hotel. The eerie light of whatever terrible moon outside glinted in from the windows. Ken led the charge, followed closely behind by Terry and Mark. Crumb was but a breath behind the 3 of them, followed by one of the Corins. Robin never was the fastest on her feet, even in a time like this. However, as she scurried along, she noticed something. Looking over her shoulder, Robin noticed that one of the Corins, still in their dragon form, was lingering behind. Limping. The extent of their injuries was much more severe than what the other Karin experienced. Biting at her bottom lip, Robin turned to help the poor creature. I gotcha, Karin. I'm here for you, Robin offered, placing her hands on places where no open wounds were seen. The dragon let out a small sound of pain, but the look in its eyes showed gratitude for the help. We gotta keep moving, though. We have no time to. Robin was cut off by the sound of a wall being kicked in. Debris and glass shot into the ground and painfully drove into her body. If she didn't know any better, she would have assumed an explosive had gone off right beside her. Yelping out in pain, Robin took the brunt of the attack and tumbled down onto the floor. Karin, too, stumbled aside as the enemy made itself known to them. Dazed, Robin looked up to spot the creature. The green, hideous monster of a mad scientist, hell-bent on bringing the dead back to life. A flea man sat hunched on his shoulder and stared down menacingly at the fallen girl and dragon. This is where it ends, Robin thought. She couldn't hear the surprised shouts of the rest of the group. I hope Karin's okay. The creature caused more property damage as he pushed aside the wall, intending fully on entering the hotel and causing as much mayhem as he possibly could. It was Dracula's order, after all. Groaning, the undead monster rose up his fists to smash down on the puny human that lay before him. Female Robin, fearing the worst, brought her arms up to protect herself. Only to have the weight of a dragon cover her body. Smashing down with its brute force, the creature landed its tag not on its intended target, but on Karin, who threw himself over her to protect her. A loud sound of pain escaped the dragon, as his already damaged body took another hit to protect someone he cared deeply for. The weight seemed to get heavier. Karin. Robin shouted, in surprise and anguish. Her eyes went upward to the creature, who was winding up for another attack. Again, it rose its powerful arms up. But this time, was met with a flash of sharp light. Dazed and confused, the monster was completely unprepared for the thwack of the cane that made impact with its jaw. Stumbling backward, the green meanie fell heavily to the ground. The bigger they are, the harder they fall, came a familiar voice. Mark? Robin asked, astonished. Before her, there was a red-suited, sunglasses-wearing hotel manager before her. Max gave a look down at the people he had been forced to save. A few letters off. But yeah, we'll roll with it. Welcome to your worst nightmares. Down in the pits. Falling. Tumbling. Those were the last things Mutwo remembered as he awoke. All around him was darkness. Not even his enhanced vision could help him make out anything around him. He blinked, and then he blinked again to no avail. The psychic Pokemon let out an annoyed huff, as he floated gently off the ground. Whatever kind of cruel, stupid trick you are pulling isn't going to work, Dracula. Mutwo continued his floating, growing more and more disgusted by the minute. Nothingness. Absolute nothingness. What kind of a madhouse was this place? He rolled his eyes in the darkness. His mind reasoned that if he continued to wander through the darkness, he would find a way out of it. He was wrong. As Mutwo continued to wander, he did eventually find something. However, it was something he would rather not have. Abruptly, he bumped into something. Something large and encapsulating. Feeling upward, Mutwo came to reason that the thing preventing him from going any further forward was glass. Strong glass. Amber glass. His thoughts finally made a connection. With hands flying up to his head, Mutwo felt that it wasn't darkness he was subjected in. He had something atop his head. Something hard. Something fitting. Something metal. He was back in the lab he was created in. A new emotion struck the Pokemon as he was brought back to the creation, and subsequently worst part of his life. He was back in that damn test tube, with scientists looking in on him and monitoring his every move. Angry wasn't the word for it. His hands went to his head, and with a burning passion above all others, he tried removing the piece of shit that was on his head. The helmet wouldn't come off. Using all the power he could manage, he tried to escape the tube he was trapped in. He kicked and blasted the glass, but unlike before, he couldn't break free. He couldn't get out of this mess. Crying out, Mutwo thrashed in his confides, growing more and more claustrophobic by the second. Were the walls moving in on him? He couldn't breathe. Fear gripped the heart of the world's most powerful Pokemon. Little Mac jolted awake in a place he would have recognized if he was only able to smell. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the place he was in, but when it did, his heart rate increased. Running a hand up to his hair, Mac came to realize that he was no longer wearing his boxing gloves. His small fist sponged around his black hair as the familiar sights and sounds echoed in his ears and illuminated in his eyes. The Bronx Prep School. He was in his desk for his 4th period English course. No one else was with him in the room as he looked around. He was all alone, wearing his stupid, uncomfortable, scratchy school uniform. It's all a trick, little Mac told himself. None of this is real. Dracula's just trying to scare you. None of this is real. Instinctively reaching down to gather his bag, little Mac tossed it onto his back. With a small inhale, he pushed himself to his feet, reasoning that the bell must have rung, or something to that degree. He didn't intend on going to his next class, though. He was getting the hell out of here. Reaching the door, little Mac was out of the classroom in the blink of an eye. Quick on his feet, the little bruiser made a beeline for the exit. Hey, Mackenzie. Little Mac froze up at the voice. Oh, he knew that voice. He knew it well. He breathed out a silent curse or two, hearing the footsteps slowly approach him. Hey, Matthias. The bigger kid towered over little Mac, and was built like a brick shithouse. A large shadow was cast over him, as the bigger boy went into intimidation tactics. You must got some big nuts to show that stupid-ass haircut around here again, Matthias huffed. I thought we beat you up so bad last time you had spent time in the hospital. You did, little Mac confirmed, still not looking at the other kid. How'd your mom find the money to pay for that? Huh? Must have brought her to the brink of bankrupt. Matthias laughed. Serves you right for giving me lip. Little Mac clenched his teeth. He knew this wasn't real. Why did that jab hurt so much? She found the money. How? She'd have to become a prostitute or something. Maybe I ought to look for her next time. The bigger kid taunted. Don't talk like that, Mac instructed. Or what? You gonna go all WVA on me? Ha! You can't even reach my face, short stack. Mac dropped his bag, but was met by a fist to the side of the head. It appeared as if Matthias wasn't the only bully present here. I'll send that stupid ass of yours back to the hospital for that one, Mackenzie. Nana? Papa? Nana? Papa? The ice climbers calling out echoed through the shared nightmare. Dusk was settling in, as the two climbers searched and searched for one another, trying their hardest to locate their second half. Just off in the distance, sometimes, they could swear they could make out the silhouette of the other. But as they approached, the figure in the distance would disappear. Papa? Nana? Papa? Nana? The two children were set to wander forever, and never find each other. Slowly, the sun began to fade and darkness began to settle over the two of them. A new fear settled in. Darkness was when the monsters came out to play. And without their other half, they were nothing but an appetizer. The lights came on in Mark's nightmare. Suddenly and quickly, the light pierced the darkness and required Mark to stick a hand up in front of his eyes to protect himself from it. He was back in his uniform for his day job at the hotel. Slowly, the lights started to dim again, and Mark was able to focus more clearly on those around him. All of this is your fault. Mark blinked twice. He knew that voice. It was close to his own, but with subtle dialectic differences that brought the two of them apart. Max? You heard me. All of this is your fault. Mark was confused. He could make out the outline of Max against the dimming lights of the room he was in. Just off and out of reach. What are you talking about? You know very well what I'm talking about. Mark opened his mouth to speak again, but found no breath coming out. Slowly looking down to his shirt, Mark could see that there was blood on his hands and clothes. The manager was unable to move from where he was. You're vile, Mark. I don't know how Nora could ever love a monster like you. Not only did the Golden Age end because of your incompetence, but you also caused the biggest bloodbath this dimension has ever seen. A flash. Almost like a memory. For the briefest of moments, the area was filled with the lifeless corpses of those who had, briefly, lost their lives during their excursion into the Reset Temple. Max, you know it wasn't my fault. Mark protested. Gee, godly obligations. You liked it. No, I didn't. Mark protested, trying to move from his chair. He was unable to. I did it because I had to. There was a glimpse from the fake Max's sunglasses. You don't deserve the life you have, and you know it. You're a monster. I shouldn't have ever come back to this realm. Should have let you suffer alone. Max. Mark protested. Why are you allowed to have a happy ending when I'm not? Monsters are to be purged, Mark. That's what I'm here to do. There was a noise of a match being lit. Against the firelight, Mark could barely make out the face of his brother. It was cold. Unfeeling. Disgusted. Then, the flame was gone. Falling to the ground. Max's face was again covered in darkness. As the flame hit the blood on the floor, it ignited. Beep. 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 Dr. Mario awoke in his own nightmare, strapped down to a hospital bed. A mask was on his face, feeding air into his lungs. Idly, the heart rate monitor bleeped and blooped its message to whoever was listening. Doc tried to rub his face but soon found that it was impossible. He was strapped in too tightly. Uncomfortably tightly. Nothing happened, as Doc was forced to sit in the bed. Nothing. Silence, except for the heart rate monitor. Beep. 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 After what felt like forever, Dr. Mario heard the door open to his room. His eyes squinted through the light the door brought in to see just who it was that was coming to visit him during this drug trip. As Doc came to realize who it was, he did a double take. Karen? Dr. Mario exclaimed through his mask. What the hell are you doing here? Dressed in typical doctor attire, the MI gave him a pleasant smile. Haven't you heard? Karen asked, grabbing for a bone saw. The doctor is in. Dr. Mario screamed out in pure agony. Richter Belmont. Tut, tut, tut. You didn't think I'd be bigger after all these years, did you? Richter awoke on his back, staring up towards the starry sky. His head was absolutely on fire, which hardly allowed the poor man any motor skills. Shakily, he moved to stand. Before noticing just how high up he really was. Teetering on the edge of a high building at night, Richter only narrowly avoided falling to his certain doom. Groaning, he grabbed at his head, wishing for the torment to stop. Show yourself, demon. Richter commanded, as best as he could. It wasn't intimidating in the slightest. Please. You've got no pony in this show. You're hardly able to stand. Now, unlike your comrades, I've given you a special task. A clock struck midnight. Loudly, it chimed out the 12 chimes. And Richter realized where he was. The clock tower. You stop your games, Dracula. Richter demanded. I wish to give you a chance to redeem yourself for your mistake all those years ago. Back when you killed her. What was her name, again? Agnes? I never was good with mortal names. Annette, Richter corrected through gritted teeth. It wasn't worth the breath to correct him, and yet, here he was. I have a new challenge for you. Maybe you recognize her? Right on cue, something materialized before Richter on the clock tower. It was the form of a woman, with a sword at her hip. Long boots protected her long legs, and a flowing, Victorian-style dress hugged her body. Fingerless gloves reached for the falchion at her side. The eyes. They were cold and unfeeling, and yet, familiar. Blueberry hair cascaded over her shoulders, and a lust for murder was about her spirit. Richter was taken aback. Behold, my temptress. Careful, Richter. Just like Annabelle, the real Lucina is in there somewhere. Try not to kill this one, or it might scar you further. Without a sound, Lucina charged at Richter. The witching hour was upon them.
Temptress Lucina.
Everything was going to hell faster than it usually did around here. A panic had settled over the smashers in the hotel, as they sought an escape from the enemy. Walls were coming apart, as monsters of ungodly origins tore and clawed their way through the entire place. The ragtag team's chances seemed to be getting smaller and smaller by the minute, like a noose tightening around their necks. At least they now had a nearly omnipotent bastard to help them out now, however. "You're taking this whole life-threatening danger thing awfully well, Mark," Crumb commented, helping the tuxedoed man carry the unconscious, but still breathing, body of the royal on his back. Max rolled his eyes, moving along with the, now human-shaped and very much unconscious, Karn on his back. "Please, stop calling me that. I'm Max. Can't you tell?" "Way to stay in character," Ken complimented. "But now isn't the time. We've got to find a way out." "Please, do you really think he'd have the balls to kill off any of us?" Max huffed. "He killed off Core one time and spent the rest of his days tormenting the lot of you with spiders and mythical temple stuff. We're gonna be fine." "No path is determined," Robin told the other. Worriedly, she fretted about. Was Karn going to be okay? He'd made such a rash and stupid decision just for her own sake, and it was eating her up inside. Another door exploded off its hinges. "Everyone bar Max," cried out in surprise. "How much property damage does this man think he can do?" Terry yelled. Suddenly, something became very clear to Max as Martha and female Karn moved to take care of the problem at hand. "He's going to bring the whole hotel down," Max muttered to himself. It made too much sense. The monsters weren't here to kill them outright. If a casualty was endured, it was part of the course. Sure, it was part of why they were here. But the easiest way to end the existence of all of these fictional characters was to bring the whole building down on top of them. Wildly, Max surveyed the area that they were in. "What are you doing, Mark?" Robin asked, as the man in red thrusted his half of male Karn's weight onto her. It took her by surprise, but she wasn't slow to pick up the slack. It was too late, however. Max was already dashing down the hallway, taking swings with his cane to rid the hallways of this darkness. He had an announcement to make. An announcement that would save the lives of those others cared about. Isaac took a look out the window again. The sky overhead was starting to worry the poor boy. The shades of green and orange in the sky made it absolutely awful to look at. Were they in some kind of tornado watch? Gods, he really hoped not. The motel seemed ready to blow away in a strong wind as is. A tornado would leave them homeless. "Close the blinds, Isaac. There's no need to worry." Reluctantly, Isaac did just that. Drawing the drapes, Isaac turned back towards the small group of assist trophies gathered around a table held together by what must be peanut butter. Atop the table, a game of cards was being played. A game that Isaac was dealt into. An icebreaker game that Lynn had found in Smashville that brought out the absolute worst in people. Sorry. Is it my turn to go?" Isaac asked. Antsy, the boy's eyes turned back toward the window. "It's just. The sky never goes that color. Those rift thingies have been happening for a while now. Maybe it's just a big rift." Knuckles pondered. He was passively interested in the sky, but he was also easily distracted by card games, and no, I don't think so. I think it's Tiki's turn. "What's the weirdest thing you've had in your mouth?" Tiki read aloud from the card. A strange question, but the manakit was not shy to answer. "I don't know, really. I'd probably have to go with my favorite dragon stone, or some ice cream pit dropped on the ground." "Oh gods, he's growing on you," Phosphora groaned out, burying her face in her hands. "Not the answer I was expecting, but I'll take it anyway," Rodan shrugged, before grabbing for his own card. "If you could be with anyone at this table, who would it be and why?" Rodan lifted his gaze from the little piece of paper in his hand and glanced around those gathered. Phosphora hopefully pushed a handful of hair from her face and gave the demon a wink. Crystal rolled her eyes and looked away. Ashley gave him a death stare. Skull Kid, Rodan answered, tossing his card down. What? Everyone exclaimed at once. Rodan shrugged. Didn't say it had to be romantic, and I feel like I could deal with his shit longer than I could deal with any of your shits. Skull Kid chortled. No he couldn't. Isaac? Knuckles prompted. I think it's your turn now, bud. Pick a card. Alright, Isaac started, reaching for a card from the pile. At that time, however, Alucard emerged from his room as dramatically as ever. The half-vampire looked grave. A look of absolute discontent was featured on his face, as he strode out of the darkness and into the light of the room. Alucard. Lynn called out, waving to him. Care to join us? The game's tons of fun and we could all get to know you better. Phosphor grinned. What kind of dark secrets could a man as handsome as you be hiding? All of the promptings were playful. But Alucard was having none of it. Isaac noticed this first. And it scared the crap out of the already paranoid boy. What? What's wrong, Alucard? Isaac asked, afraid. Something come up? Does it have to do with the sky? Alucard gravely nodded. Castlevania has once again sprung up. I sensed it this morning. I thought we were free of it in this realm, but it appears that even here the evil found a way to seep in. The Belmonts are in danger, and Count Dracula is torturing the rest of the Smashers. I must leave at once. Isaac quickly pushed himself upward. I can come with you. I'll help. No, Alucard said, gesturing for the other to sit down. Please. I must do this alone. Without another word, Alucard disappeared through the main door, leaving the other assist trophies to quake in his wake. What the hell does that mean? Crystal asked. Something bad. Isaac shuddered. Once more, the boy was up on his feet again. I'm going with him. He can't go at it alone. Isaac gathered a few of his things into his satchel. Useful things. Healing things. Giving one look back at the others, Isaac rushed out the door to follow the white-haired wonder. A beat passed, as the other assist trophies came to terms with their friends suddenly leaving. Then, it was business as usual. Shoot, it was his turn, Knuckles muttered. Oh well. My turn. Phosphorus squealed happily. Zipping forward like a streak of lightning, the deity grabbed the card from the pile. Reading it, her face turned a shade of red. Oh my. That question's a little R-rated. What is it? Tiki asked, none the wiser, and what does R-rated mean? Oh, my dear, sweet, innocent Tiki. You probably shouldn't be playing this game, Phosphor nervously giggled, before covering her mouth with a hand. Okay. Here goes nothing. When and who was? It was. Quiet. Really quiet. Quieter than she was used to. Sheik moved around the fake hotel on silent feet. Her ears were perked as she looked for a way to make herself useful. Having lost Doc, Waluigi, and Jigglypuff, Sheik continued to move along the path, mentally beating herself up about it. How could she possibly fail at the one job she was given? Useless. Turning the corner, Sheik was ready to attack whatever hideous creature waited there. However, there was nothing. With a gentle, inward sigh, the ninja continued on her fruitless path. Was there any real reason to continue on if she lost her goal, and she hadn't seen hide nor tail of anyone else she'd entered this madhouse with? Bookshelves. How did she get here? Sheik paused, suddenly too aware that she hadn't a clue of where she was anymore. It seemed to be some kind of study. The feeling of being lost hit the princess in disguise. She lost herself. Idly, she started running her thumb along the spines of some of the books. She might operate under the guise of Sheik, but she was still Princess Zelda, holder of the Triforce of Wisdom, under all the stealth suit. Shocking to some, but she'd had the mask on for over 20 years. She was surprised more people didn't know at this point. Her bookish nature, long repressed, was coming out again in this lost library. As she idly thumbed along, she couldn't help but feel drawn to a certain book in particular. A book ahead of her that seemed ancient. Red was its spine, but dusty and decrepit. It was the size of a history book. And as she came closer to it, she couldn't quite understand why. Gently, as if to preserve the integrity of said written word, Sheik thumbed it out of its location high on a shelf. It came into her arms like a baby coming into the arms of a willing, accepting mother. Pulling her mask down ever so slightly to release her mouth, she blew some of the dust away from the cover to uncover some of the text written. Or __F__D_RG_. Not much to work off of. But the book called to her. She decided to keep it close to her side, wondering just how much of the book was intact under the cover. Maybe just a glance. A sound set her off, and she was immediately on edge. Shifting into fight or flight mode, Sheik looked about for the cause of the noise, before fleeing. She'd look into the odd book another time. Darkness. Pain. Dampness. Simon groaned to life from the fall, and his hand immediately went to the pain in his side. Dracula's dark magic had made the phantom pain from the curse all those years ago flare up again. Before it was manageable. But now, it seemed to have its own heartbeat. Risking what little comfort he had, Simon decided he needed to stand if he didn't want to sit in a wet puddle for the rest of his agonizing life. Gritting his teeth, the vampire hunter willed himself to his feet. Simon Belmont. It's been quite a long time, now, hasn't it? Simon knew that voice. That awful, evil voice. Like an angry bull, Simon huffed a breath out of his nose, deducing that it wasn't worth the breath in him to shout something back at Dracula. Quiet today, are we? The voice taunted. Don't you want to know where you are? What I'm doing to torment those pathetic mortals you decided to drag with you into my hotel? I want nothing to do with you, demon. All I wish is for you to die for the final time, Simon's response came. That's the Simon I knew. Hearing the voice off to his left, Simon grabbed for his whip and swung it in that direction. Except there was no whip. Nice try. But you didn't think I'd let you keep the one thing that may let you live here, now, did you? The voice was to his right. Grabbing at his side for holy water, Simon threw it. And yet, there was nothing. Brains really were never your thing, were they? Release me from this trick, monster. Simon shouted. The voice was before him. Directly in front of him. As if he had been kicked in the gut, the pain from his phantom gash flared again. The pain was dizzying, forcing Simon to his knees. Clutching at his side, the blonde vampire hunter grabbed at his side. Only to feel real blood trickling from the spot he'd been affected. Eyes filled the darkness. Soulless, white eyes. All around Simon, eyes stared at the crumpled form of the hunter. A hand grabbed his head, forcing his eyes to look upward at his attacker. Dracula, surrounded by an army of shadow Draculas, looked upon the poor man. I've waited many centuries for this moment, Simon, the Dracula holding Simon's head told him. Humanity needs cleansing. With Simon screaming out in agony, the Draculas dove forward, digging into the fleshy body that Simon inhabited. A hill. A single gravestone. Just awakening to see the sunlight of this place was enough to send the small boy into a state of disrepair. Lucas's breath was hard to find when he finally awoke from his sleep and entered his nightmare. He recognized the place. He recognized it too well. He'd been on this very hill too many times to count. And yet, he was back again. With shaky hands, Lucas pushed himself upward. The cool breeze sent more of a shiver through him than it probably should have. It was surprisingly warm here, but he felt like an ice cube. How could he not? Slowly, Lucas walked through the grass, and approached the gravestone. It was old, and almost falling apart. A single bouquet of flowers rested atop it. Hinawa. Like many times before, Lucas burst into tears at the sight of his mother's gravestone. He knelt beside it, his hands down onto the grass. Dracula didn't need to meddle that much when the boy's life was already a nightmare. Lucina. Lucina, it's me. Richter called out to the husk of a woman he used to know. The blue-haired woman stared ahead at the Belmont with nothing short of hatred in her eyes. A burning hatred Richter had scarcely had experienced before in his life. And never from her. Whatever he's done to you, Lucina, is wrong. Don't listen to him. I know you're in there. You have to be in there. Richter's calls hit her ears, but his message didn't make it to her brain. The soulless warrior had only one thought implanted in her mind. Kill Richter Belmont at all costs. No reasoning could be done. No prisoners could be taken. No mercy could be shown. Count Dracula demanded it. Raising a shout, Lucina drew her weapon. Taking charge, she ran quickly towards the man who teetered dangerously close to the edge of the plateau. One fell kick to his stomach could lead him to tumble to his doom. Richter's instincts told him to grab his whip. His heart told him to block and dodge. His mind told him all of this was a nightmare, and that his friend could still be saved. Bracing himself for impact, Richter ducked low as Lucina swung her weapon. High. It missed him by a hair. Rolling away from the mind-controlled Lucina, Richter prepared for another assault. He had made the right assumption, as the Victorian-dressed princess had just that idea in mind. Seeing that her first attack had missed, her lifeless eyes turned to where Richter had retreated to. Shuffling her feet like the trained killing machine she was, Lucina quickly and agilely sprinted towards him again. Parrying to the left, Richter dodged another sword swipe. Ducking low, the sword chopped right over his head and barely missed his trademark bandana. Lucina. Stop this nonsense. Richter begged. She didn't listen. Swinging her sword over her head, she was going in for the kill. Right for the head. Quickly, Richter rose his forearm to clash against Lucina's. The move caught the bloodlusting pawn by surprise. Another surprise came in the form of Richter's swift disarming tactic that involved cutting the arm that held the sword. The noise of pain Lucina made as her sword sailed through the air made Richter cringe himself. That sounded like the Lucina he knew. But she definitely wasn't acting like it. The falchion clanged and clattered away, landing right on the edge of the clock tower's ledge. It teetered, threatening to fall at a moment's notice. Angrily, the temptress turned toward her assistant. Now, that's no way to treat a lady. I'll enjoy watching your heart stop beating. Richter managed to push her away, stumbling backward himself. His words obviously weren't reaching her. But he refused to pick up his whip. Not after what had happened the first time he fought on a clock tower. Please, Lucina. I know you. I know you. A solid punch was landed on Richter's jaw. Dazed for the moment, the brown-haired hunter stumbled, a hand going up to rub at his face. He hardly had time to react to another hit was thrown his way. Count Dracula wants you dead, Lucina told him, her voice as ugly as her fighting style. Humankind should be happy to oblige. But I want you alive. Richter responded. He managed to block another punch, this time one aimed at his body. The concoction Dracula had given her must have affected her fighting. It was much sloppier than usual. We don't have to do this, Lucina. We don't have to do this. Lucina is gone. Lucina yelled, venom in her voice. I am the Temptress, Lord Dracula's faithful subservient. I'll ensure his will is done, and that includes ending your pathetic life, Ricky. Ricky? Richter had the wind kicked out of him. Literally. In one fell swoop, Richter found himself flung backward and on his back. His head smacked into the hard carving of the clock tower. His headache shot up with pain, and he groaned aloud as he moved to rub it. He didn't have time. Lucina was on him like a mouse on a light. Jumping onto his downed body, she started an assault. Over and over she battered his face, his torso, and his arms. Richter cried out in pain, as over and over his head was bashed against the hard surface. Blood. He was bleeding from his nose, and a few other wounds Lucina had opened as she continued to batter him. Stars were beginning to become clearer and clearer to Richter, as the woman sitting on his stomach continued to beat the ever-loving shit out of him. This was easier than I thought it'd be. Lucina cackled. Lord Dracula said you'd put up a fight. And yet, here you are. Pathetic. Richter let out a low groan as she taunted him. Swiftly, Lucina grabbed for a knife that was held in her long boots. Maybe I should carve my name into your body, so people will know who did this to you, Lucina offered. She held the knife but inches away from Richter's jugular, stopped only by Richter's, rather weak, resistance. It appears your bloodline ends here. Not that you were going to do anything to advance it, anyway. Do you have any last words, Belmont? Richter breathed a hefty breath. The blood was warm, and it stung his eyes. You don't have to do this. Lucy. Lucy? Was that a spark of life in her eyes? It was faint and quick, but there was something there. I know not of what you mean, the Temptress said, shaking her head. Lord Drac. You're the daughter of Krom, who comes from a destroyed timeline, Richter continued. You had a fling with Solo, which ended in heartbreak. Stop that. The Temptress commanded, desperately trying to hold on to her host. The sparks of life were coming to Lucina more quickly now. Gripping the knife, she moved to strike at Richter's neck again but found it impossible to go deeper than where she was. You're a nerd with no sense of style, Richter muttered. You think both Robins are too stuck up, and need to get out more. You like singing, but only when you think no one is listening. A scream echoed from Lucina's body, as the spirit of the Temptress fought against the spirit of the girl who owned the body. Richter's labored breath continued. Sometimes you're funny. Sometimes, you need a shoulder to lean on. As you remember the past. You're loyal. You've got good morals. Richter sighed out, his headache screaming. You're the best friend a guy could ever want. The scream continued for a moment or so more until the spirit of the Temptress was forcefully removed from the host. Like a sack of feathers, Lucina's body slumped over onto Richter's chest. As it hit, the knife in her hand tumbled off and over the edge of the clock tower. All consciousness that Lucina might have had moments ago was out, as she laid on top of the man who had just exorcised the demon out of her. Labored, Richter brought an arm up to embrace her form, hugging her to him. Damn, did his everything hurt? But he was glad his best friend was back in safe hands. All at once, the realm began to shift from the illusion. Good, Richter thought, with a sigh. He had a vampire to kill. Max ducked and dodged throughout the hallways, avoiding conflict rather than engaging with it. Why would he fight back if he had put together the predetermined path that was to follow? He knew one thing, and he knew that it must be done as quickly as possible. The other fighters needed to be warned about the danger. As Max sprinted, jumped, and dodged his way through the hallway, Max felt a tug on his jacket. Something had grabbed him. The fabric of his tuxedo was beginning to tear as he threw a backhanded elbow into the face of what ungodly creature had grabbed him. He was free in an instant and continued on his way. Duck and weave, jump and sprint. Max was plunging deeper and deeper into the heart of the hotel toward the master office. Why are you doing any of this? None of this is real. His inner thoughts shouted at him. He knew he was right to think this. None of this was real. Why should he care about a bunch of fictional characters who, at last encounter, wanted to have his head on a silver platter? They brought joy to others. Max had come to accept that he was nothing more than a puppet to be played with and controlled by some unholy creator. His joy, however fleeting it had been all those years ago, was long past. But here was a chance for him to bring joy to the others that looked in on his world. His fake world, but his world nonetheless. Cut the shit. He's making you do this so that you have something important to do this on. Max rolled his eyes at the thought. Again, it was probably true, but he pushed it away. He didn't need to know the motives behind his actions if it was going to save others. After all, he'd be sitting around in the void. Coming to the master office, he pulled the doorknob only to find that it was locked. A note attached to the door informed him that the hands were currently out of the office right now. Perfect. Convenient to the plot. The sign wouldn't stop Max. He could read but had a general disdain for rules set for him. Taking his staff, Max batted the window down. Surprisingly, it shattered without much of a fight. Reaching his hand through the glass, and tattering his suit in the process, Max unlocked the door. He was hardly inside as arms of the undead army began to reach inside. Taking his cane once more, Max whacked the creatures away. Hands off the suit. It costs more than your life, he growled, whacking heads left and right. Where that line came from was beyond him. Max was a dirt-poor wanderer. Grabbing a chair and a potted plant, Max barricaded the door, before his eyes darted around the inside of the room. The massive desk sat directly in the middle, with a starry sky everywhere else. With no fear of falling, Max strode towards the desk and climbed onto the oversized pile of wood. There's gotta be an intercom around here somewhere. The man mused aloud, rubbing at a cut on his arm. It didn't necessarily hurt, but it was something to do to help him out during this trying time. The battering against the door seemed to get louder. The Lord of Knowledge tried to push it away, but it was like a steady heartbeat against a ribcage. Freaky. In a matter of moments, the creatures would be inside, and he would be nothing more than a sitting duck. He needed to think fast. Grabbing open the door, he found a little bed that Master Core slept in. Seeing that it had no use to him, he laboriously pushed it closed once more. Going down a drawer, Max found what he was looking for. A golden microphone. It was the very same instrument that Hans used to make announcements over the intercom when the announcer was out of commission. It was much scratchier and rougher than the announcer and was only used as a last-ditch effort. This was about as last-ditch as they came. The door flew off of its hinges, as Dracula's army of the undead made their way inside. Flicking on the switch, Max started his message. Evacuate the hotel. The madman is going to bring it down, and if you don't leave, you'll be buried under the rubble. I repeat, get out while you can. This is not a drill. Run. Scream. Find somewhere to be. Just don't stay here. You've got to evacuate. Escape. You. The line was cut as the army flooded the room and assaulted the all-knowing Temple Lord. Alucard was swift to infiltrate the new Castlevania. While the castle itself was an agent of chaos, Alucard had grown accustomed to storming it. His father worked in mysterious ways that even Alucard himself couldn't understand. The place changed so often and with every reincarnation that he thought Dracula was some sort of interior designer. As Alucard kicked down the front door of the castle, he noticed something peculiar. This place was new, yet held a sort of familiarity that the half-vampire could sense. It felt less like a castle than it usually did, and more like a hotel. An odd choice, Alucard mused aloud to himself. A sword floated by his head and was under his command, ready to strike at the hearts of anyone who tried to get in his way. Looking around the lobby area, Alucard saw no such threats. The others must have beaten them away. Alucard sensed something behind him. An entity that radiated heat and... Was the insecurity? Alucard turned quickly, his sword drawn and ready to attack whoever it was that was trailing him. A shocked sound escaped the other, and his hands went up. Hey. Careful. It's just me, ow. Do not call me that, Isaac, Alucard commanded, a gruff tone to his voice. Why would you follow me to this place? I told you to stay back at the motel. I can help. Isaac reassured. I know how to do all kinds of useful things. You've seen me do them before. Alucard sighed deeply, a hand going to his face. You know not of the terrors that live here, Isaac. You aren't ready to face them. Dracula. He'll eat you alive. He doesn't stand a chance, Isaac boldly proclaimed, puffing out his chest. As he did so, he knocked over a suit of armor, which clattered noisily to the ground. Isaac, in turn, released a loud, high-pitched scream. Again, Alucard sighed. He stands more than just a chance. But as long as you're here, I won't leave you to die on the first floor. Come. The stairs are calling. Ominously, a set of stairs sat ahead of them, illuminated only by moonlight. It was just a nightmare. There was nothing real and tangible to fear here. Everything was nothing but an illusion set forth by an evil vampire, set on stealing their souls and reaping mankind. So why did he feel like he was going to die here? Waluigi sat in the darkness of the nightmare. Absolute darkness. As far as the eye could see, there was nothingness. It was as if he was in a void. Manhole, surrounded by nothing and everything at once. The lack of light felt like the darkness and longing in his empty heart. It was searching and scanning for something to make of his life, and yet, there seemed to be absolutely nothing. Nothing at all to fill the greedy, sad hole in Waluigi's heart. The plumber looked up. Nothing. He looked down. Darkness. No matter where his eyes looked, he saw nothing. Was this what being blind was? Or was it just being misguided? The plumber felt obsolete here as if nothing he did mattered. In reality, he didn't. In the real world, he was a shadow that contributed nothing. Why would his nightmare be any different? King Dedede woke up with a groan. Inside of Castle Dedede, the large penguin awoke atop his throne. His head was aching and so was his empty stomach, but really, what was new? The interior of his castle was new, that's what. Squinting, the king spied that his beloved life's work was reduced to little more than holes and dents, with large pieces of the interior becoming the exterior. The draft was awful, and the aesthetic was even worse. It ticked the big king right off. Bandana D. King Dedede cried out, clapping his hands together. Bandana D, what in the heck is this mess all about? I want this cleaned up before I am done with my mid-morning nap, you hear me, you sniveling little? Something was wrong. All at once, the pain in Dedede's empty stomach began to ripple deeper. It was no longer the pains of a fat king who hadn't eaten in 15 minutes. It was something more. Clenching his fist against a chair, King Dedede gritted his teeth. The pain was intensive and almost unbearable, but a familiar pain. Unfortunately, he knew what this was, and his heart started trying to leap from his chest. Literally. Screaming out in pain, King Dedede saw the transformation begin before his very eyes. Pieces of his flesh began to tear away, leaving only the darkness of dark matter in its wake. His mind was beginning to grow fuzzy with the hostile takeover of his body. More and more of his flesh and clothing were beginning to be torn away, as sharp, pointy teeth began to spring up in its place. His gut ripped open, with only a single eyeball in the middle. Hello, King Dedede, dark matter spoke, his voice as sinister as ever. Let's go for a joyride, shall we? Get up, Belmo. You're quite pathetic. Simon was hardly hanging on to his life any longer. This had to be a dream. A nightmare. The worst kind of lucid dream he had ever experienced. The pain felt so real. So natural. However, his spirit was not broken by the assault of the horde of Draculas. Slowly, he lifted his head upward towards the creatures. His face streamed with blood and the hole in his side was beginning to grow deeper. His breathing was heavy and stagnant. Without your toys, you don't fight very well, vampire killer, one of the Draculas taunted. To think, you once defeated me, another spoke. Pathetic. You're off your game, old man. Have you had enough? As long as there is still breath within me. Simon spoke, slowly. Then, I haven't given enough. Bold words for a man that I could crush like a gnat, Dracula mused. If I kill him here, in this universe, Richter will never be born. I'd have never been defeated then, or by you. And your home timeline will be thrown into darkness. The more we speak about it, another said, the more appealing it becomes. What do you say, gentlemen? Should we end him here? The Draculas were all in agreement. Simon Belmont must die. One of the Draculas reached down to the beaten man. Simon struggled as he was lifted up by the neck, but his struggles were in vain. Dracula's fingers were tight around his throat as the air was squeezed from him. Simon panted and huffed, kicked and hit, but nothing was enough to release him. Pathetic, the Dracula said, his cold, dead, unfeeling eyes staring directly through the man he held. The legendary Simon Belmont hardly putting up a fight as the air is choked away from him. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Richter, too, shall be as obsolete as you are. Simon sputtered. The darkness was starting to close in as his lungs gasped for breath. His struggling was getting weaker and weaker by the second, as the very life he had was being torn away from him. His mind briefly went to Richter, and then to Lady Bayonetta. The sadness they'd experience. Simon's grip grew weaker, as he began to slip. Release him. The cry caught the Draculas off guard. The Dracula strangling Simon loosened just enough or just long enough for Simon to steal a breath. It was like drinking water on a hot day. Soon enough, however, the grip returned even tighter. A giant fist tore through a hole in the darkness, scooping up a handful of hissing Draculas and tossing them aside. Gunshots rang out, and hair was everywhere. Lady Bayonetta. And she was pissed. Try as they might, the dream Dracula stood no chance against the Umbra Witch. The Dracula holding Simon let the battered vampire slayer go, dropping him to his knees. Like a fish out of water, Simon panted and gagged on the floor, nearly losing his lunch in the process. Did you really think a fake witch trial was going to terrify me into submission? Bayonetta asked as she stomped the Dracula's back to dust. An arm swept through, clearing a path. I'll have you know, I prefer to be the dominant. The Draculas retreated into the darkness of the dream world. Just like that, the threat was reduced to nothingness, as it was, after all, just a dream. A bad dream. But a dream nonetheless. Bayonetta was suddenly at Simon's side, kneeling down beside him to offer comfort and care in this trying time. Her arms wrapped around his shoulders. Are you alright, darling? Did they hurt you? Simon said nothing, as he continued to struggle to find his breath. Wheezing, he hit his chest to try and force more air into his lungs. Wordlessly, he put his arms around his savior. The dreamland began to shift, as the nightmare was overcome. Real Dracula had a real storm coming. Minutes passed. Or maybe it was hours. Maybe even days. Time was always a mystery. Thump. 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 In her skin, she was a prisoner. Her captor settled in after a tonic was forced past her lips. The temptress took control and tried to take the life of a friend she loved ever so deeply. Dracula had used her as a pawn to psychologically torment a man who had already been through so much, in hopes that both of them would be dead and out of the way. Thump. 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 Was she free now? She was unaware of her surroundings. It was dark. She was asleep. It was a deep, dreamless sleep, but a sleep nonetheless. A sleep she wanted to come out of. It was unpleasant to say the least. But at least she wasn't trapped anymore. Thump. 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 Was that a light? Was it wise to go into the light? She didn't know, but at this point it was too late to stop. Hours of darkness made her long for the light, and the light seemed to long for her. Rapidly, she sprinted towards the light in hopes that it wouldn't be the end of her tale, but the second wind she desperately needed at a time like this. Thump. 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 The gentle noise kept her grounded to reality, but she couldn't tell what it was or why it was here. All she knew is that it was soothing to her weary soul and a needed solace in a world of pain. Thump. 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 Stirring gently from the deep sleep she had been in, the light Lucinus printed towards became clearer and clearer. Suddenly, she began to feel things about her body again. She could feel the long boots Dracula had dressed her in riding up uncomfortably on her calves. She felt the headache that had come from being possessed and then thrown back out into the light again. She felt a warmness against her. Thump. 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 Gently, her eyes fluttered open. The light she sprinted towards hurt her, even if it was dim. The dimness of the light was more than the darkness she'd just witnessed. Groaning, a hand went up to hold her head, and that was when she realized she was not alone in this world. There was a warm body beneath her. And a softly beating heart. Richter Belmont was in rough shape. He seemed to have fallen asleep on the cold, hard floor of the dungeon Dracula had designed for them. He was bloody and battered. But if the soft, reassuring beating of his heart told Lucina anything, it was that he was still alive. Thump. 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 The rhythmic beats were gentle and reassuring. She desperately needed it now. Burying her head into the crook of Richter's neck, Lucina awaited him to awaken. She would need him in the upcoming battle that she sensed was coming on. They would need each other if they wanted to hold a candle against Dracula. And, well, Lucina supposed she owed Richter both an apology and a thank you. And a good patching up. The message was out. Max's word had sent those in the hotel into a deeper state of panic. With newfound concern for their own lives and the monsters coming in from every direction, the Smashers, unfortunate enough to be trapped in the hotel, looked for a way out any way they could. There was no way they were going to be caught in a collapsing building. Captain Falcon gathered as many fighters as he could and escaped with them out the back door through the garage. Donkey Kong and a few of the bigger fighters found walls easy enough to burst out of to save their skins. Sonic rushed in and out of the hotel, saving as many of the younger fighters as he could, putting his own life on the line. The message was loud and clear. But others still struggled to escape. "Where do we go from here?" Terry shouted. He was getting tired. His muscles cried out from all the fighting. And he wasn't the only one. The rest of the party seemed to be tiring as time went on. Female Karen had returned back to her original form, as keeping up the dragon form was taking too much energy. Marth looked as if he had just gone swimming with all the sweat he had been sweating. Ken's breath was heavy and hard, but his fists remained raised to destroy any creatures of the night that came his way. Robin bit her lip, continuing to hoist Male Karen up on her arm. Crom's help was appreciated, but that didn't stop Karen from weighing a ton. Robin stuttered before she took in their surroundings. They were by the rec room. Quickly, her head turned. The garden was directly adjacent to the game room and led to the back door of the hotel. Dots connected quickly in Robin's head, and with her free hand, she pointed. "There. Through the garden. We're almost done."
Okay!
Terry shouted out, before dashing ahead. Kicking down the door, the King of Fighters was the first one out. The enclosed garden looked terrifying in this light. The sky above illuminated every branching flower in a color that was nothing short of ominous. As Robin entered the room, something felt amiss. "Something's in here," Ken said, saying what everyone else had thought and felt. Marth gritted his teeth and readied his sword, "And I don't think that whatever is in here is here to welcome us to the neighborhood." "Right you are on both accounts, dear heroes. Unfortunately for you, this encounter will be your last." Gathering tightly together in a circle, the group spied a horrifying cloud of energy spiral downward and begin to take a physical form. Sprouting skeletal arms and a long, black hood, the skull-headed monster grunted down towards his underlings. "Death?" Crom asked, taken aback. A scythe manifested from the air, which the Reaper took with pride. "Right you are, puny mortals," it spoke, its voice like a raspy whisper. Its eyes turned towards female Robin, who held the still unconscious male Karen on her back. A devilish smirk appeared on Death's skeletal face. "And I see you've brought an offering." A soft groaning was the first thing Lucina heard after what felt like hours of embracing the warmth and the reassuring heartbeat against her ears. The sound jostled her out of the seamy sleep she was in, as it appeared that someone around her was beginning to awaken. Pushing herself, reluctantly, off of Richter's still body, she stared down at the young man. The blood from the battle he had against her was still present on his face, and his hair was in an uneven mess. However, despite these physical injuries, a heart of gold still pulsated inside of him. And, she had to admit, he was rather handsome. Richter's dashing good looks had never crossed her mind before, and now certainly wasn't the time to be having these thoughts, but she couldn't help it, as she watched the sleeping man snooze.
Dracula. Dracula. Dracula.
Gently, and hesitantly, as she wasn't sure how fluid her movements were coming off of Dracula's tonic, she moved to push the clump of hair out of his eyes. The gash marks upside his head definitely had to hurt. And a part of her heart panged knowing that she was the one to have caused them. "I'll make this right," Lucina promised inwardly. The groaning started to become slightly louder, and Lucina turned her head towards the source of the groaning. The other Belmont, Simon, was beginning to stir from his own nightmare, and so was the Umbra Witch. Slowly, Lucina watched as the two of them woke up from her spot atop Richter's stomach. She did not intend on going anywhere until Richter was wide awake once again, like a cat waiting to be fed by its owner. Instead, she simply watched, as Simon sputtered for breath once he awoke, and how Bayonetta was almost uncharacteristically gentle to him. Love sure did funny things to people. It took a moment before Simon's breathing returned to normal, and Bayonetta had to help the poor vampire killer stand on his feet once again, but eventually, they were both mobile again. Once they began moving, however, they were bound to realize the young woman was awake and alive. Simon reached for his whip out of instinct, believing this to be another trick of Dracula's. Bayonetta, seeing this apprehension, took to her guns. And no. Lucina cried, pulling her hands up in a defensive position. Don't. How do we know you aren't another one of Draxtrix? Bayonetta asked, cautiously. I'm not. I promise. Lucina exclaimed. An idea came to her to prove herself. Slowly, she began to move down Richter's body towards his belt where all his holy weaponry was held. This better not be going where I think it's going, Bayonetta remarked, flaunting her gun. Now is not the time. What? Simon asked, coughing. Bayonetta rolled her eyes. Nothing, sweetness. Reaching down to his belt, Lucina picked up the holy cross that Richter often carried with him. Touching it was usually enough to deal with the monsters that tried to oppose him. Seeing that Lucina was able to not only touch it, but lift it from his belt was enough evidence for both of them. Hell, I can't even do that, Bayonetta tittered. Must be the real deal. Of course. Lucina, my friend. It is wonderful to see you once more. Simon exclaimed, his voice still raspy but recovering. Reaching downward, he wrapped the warrior in a hefty bear hug. Lucina was choked, but let down soon enough to not suffer a similar fate that Simon himself had. Nice. Nice to be back. Lucina muttered. A pang of guilt hit her again, as she glanced back at the one who had saved her. Richter saved me. But only after I beat the snot out of him. Sounds like he didn't want a repeat of what happened to her, Bayonetta muttered. I'm glad he found a workaround. Lucina nodded, not fully understanding what she meant by that. The long and short of the situation was that she, too, was glad that she wasn't dead. Simon gave a small nod to the others, before looking about to the rest of the dungeon. Sleeping fighters in several states of distress. It was obvious that none of these dreams were sweet. Looking back at his cohorts, both women gave him a nod. It seemed as if they were on wake-up duty. Ridley's eyes flew open as he was awakened from the nightmare he had been having. Rubbing at his oblong cranium, Ridley looked around at the rest of the fighters that were beginning to awaken. They seemed to have been through a similar experience that he had. The pheromones gave off by everyone around him reeked of fear. Usually, it would have been Ridley's favorite scent in the world. But he was too spent currently to fully enjoy it. Looking around, Ridley saw Lucas and Rosalina embracing, and whispering sweet nothings to each other. Wario gave a wild-eyed look to Bayonetta when she offered him a hand, before scurrying to his own feet. Pac-Man was laying on his back staring directly up past the ceiling, or lack thereof, having a mental breakdown. Yeah. Dracula sure had fucked them over. Mamma mia, Dr. Mario groaned as he woke up. I had the worst nightmare imaginable. Sure you did, Dedede said, almost coldly. Touching his tummy, King Dedede was glad to find only the regular amount of fat and nothing more. No pain stung him, either. He breathed a deep sigh of relief. 2 words, Doc shuddered. Doctor. Karen. Hey, wait a minute, came Little Mac's shaky voice. The boxer seemed to be more on edge than usual, checking over his shoulder to ensure that no one was following him. How did you get down here? You didn't have to do the hellish platforming did that we did. Magic bullshit slide, Waluigi murmured. Jigglypuff and Dr. Mario pointed at Waluigi in agreement. The next fighter to awaken, Incineroar, did so with a roll. The big cat popped up and looked around. Without warning, he dashed to Little Mac's side and wrapped him in a deep hug. Mac nearly punched the big cat but restrained himself. Hugging back, the two shared an embrace in the moment. A much-needed embrace. Richter was slowly coming back. The brave warrior began to stir in his slumber, which Lucina was quick to pick up on. His breathing was shallow and heavy, and sweat was beginning to pool around his brows. In another instant, his eyes flew open. Richter. Simon called, but the calls of his ancestor fell deaf to Richter's ears. There was only one thought on his mind, and one person occupying that spot. Lucina. The clock tower. Was it a repeat? Pushing himself upward too fast, Richter's headache flared to life. He didn't care. He only cared about one person. His best friend in the world. Lucina. Richter called, spotting the blueberry-haired woman before him. All but diving forward, the man hugged her tightly. He was shaking. There was heavy emotion in his voice as he hugged her. It didn't take long before Lucina felt that same emotion boiling within her. Thank God. You're alive. I'm sorry, Lucina started, choking on her words. Gods, this wasn't going to be easy. I didn't. Luckily, Richter stopped her. It is my fault for letting Dracula capture you, Richter told her. The same idea rang true in Richter's head about Annette. But, Lucina was safe. Don't apologize. I'm just glad you aren't dead. The two embraced in silence for a long moment. Wrapped together, it seemed as if the other smashers disappeared. They didn't. Instead, they stood around awkwardly watching, until someone finally spoke up. So, Ridley started. Pichu, shaking like a leaf, had returned to his rightful perch on Ridley's shoulder. This was touching, and all. But what the hell do we do now? Where do we go? This Dracula bastard's got a big red X on his forehead and I'm about ready to stab him there. Pac-Man began, scratching at his bald, yellow head. Good question. This place is like a maze. Aren't you good at mazes? Wario scoffed. Amateur. When there are glowy yellow dots. Pac-Man informed. And I don't see any power pellets here. I'm sure it can't be too much further. Rosalina muttered quiet. Her fighting spirit was all gone at this point, as she cradled and cooed Lucas and Ness in her lap. She just wanted out of this nightmare. Just then, a figure landed beside Simon. Cloaked in black, the figure startled the others, who grabbed for their weapons. They were no longer willing to take chances. This could be another trick. Screaming was heard, as the second figure plummeted from above. If it were not for Muto's psychic power, there would be a new human-sized hole in the ground. Isaac was set down beside the other figure, still screaming. Alucard lifted his head from his hood. Allow me to show you the way. I believe it's time we pay my father a visit. Isaac struck a heroic pose. Dracula was in for it now. Robin's eyes went wide at the Wraith's proposition. Go away. She shouted, gripping tighter to her friend. There's no offering for you here. Ah, but that's where you're wrong, the Reaper mused, clicking its hellish teeth together. His soul is so close to my domain. If you allow me to come closer. Never. Robin yelled. Death huffed, the blue flame in his eyes darkening at the mortal's disposition. So be it. If I cannot have his soul, I'll take the pot. Death comes for the foolish. Frilling out his cloak, the hooded specter began to beckon sides to himself. From seemingly nowhere, the sharp tools began to spin in the air. To seal the deal on the creep factor, a bolt of lightning shot through the orange sky, illuminating Death in a more terrifying light. Robin froze up, her arms still clinging tightly to Karin's body. Duck. Tackling her to the ground, and dropping Karin in the process, Crumb managed to help Robin narrowly avoid a harrowing fate. The rest of the party followed suit, as Death swooped overhead. Again, Dracula's most trusted member missed by only mere inches. Terry, seeing his opportunity, dove in for an attack.
How about that?
Shouted he, as he jumped into the air. A fiery ball of energy encapsulated his hand, as the long-haired warrior struck his first blow. Except, he hit nothing. Terry dug right through Death and ended up face first on the ground. The specter simply chuckled a sinister chuckle. You're dumber than you look. You cannot kill Death, for Death is what bags your soul once you die. You dare try to strike at me? Consider today your last. Screaming souls of the damned came from beneath Terry's feet, as Death conjured their power. The sight and sound made those in Robin's party shudder. Ken clapped his hands firmly over his ears, before getting smacked in the head by one of the very souls he was trying to drown out. The light contact was enough to send memories of this poor creature's existence into Ken's head. He screamed out in torment, seeing what the end of days must look like to someone damned to fight for Dracula's army. Ken. Marth called out, rushing towards his buddy. Ducky, the hero king narrowly avoided a similar attack. The spirit crashed into the flower bush behind him and instantly withered the plant. Raising his arms, Death conjured more of his dark magic. The rest of the garden began to shift from soft colors of blues, pinks, and greens into a more sinister, deathly, monotone brown. All around itself, Death saw chaos, pain, and destruction. Which was exactly what he wanted. Hiding behind a dead rose bush, Robin took a moment to breathe. The place was going haywire, and her ragtag team of survivors was nowhere near as prepared or orderly as she would have liked. Crumb stood with his back against female Karin, as the duo fought against the army of the undead that had re-emerged and intruded on the garden. It was a losing fight. Death flung another scythe in their direction, before fading, and appearing before Ken and Marth to torment them. How does Simon do it? Robin shouted to herself, stressed beyond words. She gripped at her pigtails, kicking herself for her inability to think. If anyone died here, it was on her. I see you've made an offering. Robin's eyes flung towards the place that male Karin was laying, which was 15 feet away from her own position. He looked so peaceful, among the absolute carnage that was going on the battlefield. He wasn't dead. But a fear in Robin's heart told her that he might soon be if she didn't act fast. A flying scythe flying through the dead rose bush she was taking refuge behind threw Robin back into reality. Fearful, she screamed out, ducking as the plant was shredded above her very head. The scythe, which seemed to have a mind of its own, suddenly changed directions in the air and headed right towards Karin. "No!" female Robin cried out. Shuffling up to her feet, she rushed ahead. Casting her hand outward, she cried, "Hellwind!" The magic came from her fingertips and hit the underside of the blade. Ricocheting, the nasty farmer's tool returned her direction. Having hardly any time to react, Robin threw up her arms and took the blunt force of the cutting blade against her own skin. "Now we're even." The thought made her laugh, as she felt the pain beginning to flare up in her torso. Blood, too, began to trickle out of her wounded body. But the blade, it was gone. It didn't hit him, and it didn't stick around to help her out any, either. Robin. Marth, breaking through the crowd of enemies, and narrowly avoiding a scythe and soul combo, rushed to the wounded tactician's side. Death loomed ominously overhead, looking down upon the two of them. Pathetic. Robin coughed, applying pressure to her newly decimated side. It was a deep cut and was staining her black robe a new shade of red. Robin's head was fuzzy, as she looked to the Hero King. The light bulb came on. "How does Simon do it?" "Holy weaponry," Robin sputtered out. "What?" Marth asked, looking to her. "Robin, please, you need to rest." "And no," she groaned out, a new flare of pain hitting her body. "God, did that hurt? Marth. You and Crumb need to strike dead." "You saw what happened with Terry," Marth proclaimed. "He went right through the G." Marth put two and two together. Looking to his sword, the man remembered the blessings of goddesses that were upon it. The very same was true for Crumb, who was struggling to keep up against the mounting force of enemies coming his way. Robin looked to Marth and offered a wing. She rested her back against the unconscious Karin, letting out a sigh as she laid back. "Ah. Be okay. Us tacticians have a plan. For everything, okay?" Marth nodded, pressing a hand against her shoulder. "Your bravery will be rewarded, dear Robin." Rising with a new determination and a falchion in hand, Marth turned his attention toward the monster above. "A new challenger?" Death asked, seeing the fire in Marth's eyes. "HMPH. Souls are always better when they go out screaming. You're going." Death was silenced as Marth cut him with his sword. The creature screamed out, as the holy properties of the sword seemed to burn against his very bones. Retreating, Death upped the scales of his attacks. "We've got him on the run," Ken Shakely shouted, a hint of cheer to his voice. "Good. The bastard could take a hike for all Ken cared."
Are you okay?
Terry asked, placing a hand on Ken's shoulder. Ken initially jumped, knowing only one thing to come after that phrase. Usually, when he did that, Terry sent him into orbit. "Why yeah, I'm good." "Crumb," Marth called out, taking another stab at Death. The Prince of Liss looked up from his fight to see the Hero King motion for him. Crumb didn't hesitate. "Fools!" Death cried out, as he was repeatedly struck. "I will come for you. In your darkest hour, I'll be waiting. You beat me back for now, and I will return." Death waits for no one. No one. With one consecutive strike, Marth and Crumb struck Death out of the garden. With a scream, the cloaked figure faded to nothingness, and so did the army that surrounded him. But the damage was done. The once beautiful garden was devoid of any color but brown. It was sad to see. But the important thing was that they had survived it. For the most part. Robin inhaled sharply, as she tried to stop the bleeding with her cloak. As soon as Death was gone, the rest of the party went to her side. "How are you feeling?" female Karin asked, getting awkwardly close to the hurt woman. Just peachy, thanks," Robin sarcastically replied. The hotel shook violently, as another support beam was taken out. The fear of Naga was put into every one of them. "We've got to get out of here," Terry shouted too loudly. They didn't need to be told twice. With Terry and Marth to assist her, and female Karin and Ken to assist male Karin, the group escaped. The Black Wisp followed them out. The doors to the throne room were kicked open, as Lucard stormed inside. The windows were tinted and stained, and a long, red-carpeted walkway stood between him and the one they had come here to face. Support pillars were along the walls, seemingly keeping everything together. A fragrance of deceit and doom filled the nostrils of everyone who entered the room. "For some reason, I'm getting some major deja vu," Sans commented, rubbing at his chin. No one responded to the skeletal instead flanking the Lucan. Richter and Simon stood on either side of the half-vampire, with Isaac, Bayonetta, and Lucina directly beside them. Each hero or heroine had their weapons drawn and prepared to strike. Isaac looked scared out of his mind, while Bayonetta, Simon, Richter, and Lucina seemed prepared to verbally assault Dracula. The rest of the fighters filled in the gap behind the others. I don't think I like where this is going, Mark muttered to Pac-Man, a hint of fear in his voice. In his hands, the hotel manager held a fake cane, as he did not bring his Temple Guardian sword with him to a Halloween party. Me either, Pac-Man mumbled in reply, fiddling through his list of bonus fruits. Did you want a bell or a key for this situation? He'd never been a vampire hunter before. But after what he did to us, I think it's justified. Are we gonna be okay? Nana timidly asked. Her eyes avoided Mark. But the question was aimed at him. As much as she hated to admit it, she actually felt reassured when she was fighting on the same side as Mark. Sure, she still hated him for his actions, but she needed an adult to tell her everything would be alright. Hopefully, the hotel manager replied. We just gotta be careful. Slowly, the posse crept forward, as if trying to sneak up on Dracula. Lounging in the chair, Dracula held a wine glass within his fingers. He didn't much care for the taste. It seemed too bitter. A fist rested against his cheek as the group walked down his, seemingly endless, walkway. Apathetic to no end, Dracula waited. He knew the song and dance at this point. But now, this was going to be different. A small smirk overcame the vampire. For what reason have you returned? Simon asked, a sting to his voice. The older vampire hunter lashed his whip against the ground as the fighters came closer. Have you only come to cause more chaos and destruction? Even here, away from your home world, you are nothing more than a life-stealing cretin. I take life to reshape it, Dracula informed, an almost bored expression about him. These mortals were not worthy of him. Shifting, Dracula asserted a more powerful position in his throne, as if he were a king and the others were here to pay him tribute. Idly, his long fingernails rapped against the ebony black furniture. You see me as a menace to stop simply because I try to change the world for the better. Change for the better? Richter cried out.
You steal men's souls and make them your slaves!
Lucina shuddered but held tightly to her blade. Dracula scoffed.
Perhaps the same could be said of all religions.
There's that deja vu feeling again, Sans mused, rubbing his cranium. We don't like you. Lucas cried out from the crowd, to which everyone agreed. Holding on to his reed, the blond boy was prepared to do his worst to the evil before him. I don't need your approval, Dracula told him. I just need your allegiance. Willing or not. And I'm going to need you to shut the fuck up, Ridley growled. The apex predator was not here to chat with the literal embodiment of darkness. His tail was pricked and prepared to stab at the heart like a stake. Dracula ignored Ridley's comment, instead shifting his focus to the halfman who had led them here. Alucard. How nice of you to stop in for a visit. I won't be long, the son of Dracula returned. I intend on making this battle quick. As do I, Dracula told the other. There was a glint in the Count's eye as he stared at the others. It appears I've attracted a crowd. I have a final proposition for all of you. Join me, and I won't kill you. The rest of you will not be walking out of here alive. Dracula's eyes turned towards Lucina, staring directly into her soul. Lucina grit her teeth. Enough talk. She shouted, holding her sword high. Have at you. Dracula chuckled. Eager, are we? Hoisting himself upward, Dracula tossed his glass of wine to the ground, before flicking his cape behind himself. Fine, then. If you wish to die, I will grant you this wish. Another glint shone from Dracula's eyes.
How about you?
Dracula rose his hands upward, and the entire throne room began to tremble. The amount of dark energy Dracula held in the tips of his straw-like fingers was almost immeasurable. Richter's headache flared again as he felt movement. The room itself seemed ready to detach itself from the world and transcend into one of Dracula's own making. Because that's exactly what Dracula intended on doing. Count Dracula was not one to play fair. There was a reason he was called the Prince of Darkness. He would use any and all low-down, below-the-belt moves to achieve what he wanted. He was a tactical thinker, who knew the best way to deal with his foes. Why put himself on the line when he could just decimate them on his own terms? Demon. Simon called out, his side flaring with the pain Richter felt in his head. The man gritted his teeth, as he forced himself to stand against the moving room. Others had toppled over onto their backsides, as the room itself began to dislodge from the hotel. You are going to get just what you deserve. I know, Dracula calmly answered. His cape whipped against a dark wind, along with his hair. He looked like a sane, mad king, except he had the power to do what no mortal before him could. I think I''M.A. Been a hurled groan, as the shaking and the motion of the raising building got the better of him. The poor doctor put a hand in front of his mouth to catch any spillage that might have occurred. In a matter of moments, the throne room was no longer a long hallway. It had detached itself from the rest of the hotel and began hovering above the black void of Dracula's own volition. Little Mac visibly tensed up as he felt the ground beneath him disappear, replaced by this floating platform of ungodly origin. "You should have stayed dead," Alucard told his father, his sword drawn and ready to strike. "I'll make you regret ever being reincarnated." "Such harsh words for your dear old dad, Alucard," Dracula told him. The larger vampire flicked his gaze away, staring dead at his own offspring. "What would your mother think?" "Don't you dare speak of her," Alucard spat. "She would tell you not to hate the humans. They've taken too much from you. They will pay for what they did," he snarled back. Dracula's eyes widened with an inward burning fury. "Sounds like someone's got some mommy issues," Ridley commented, slowly picking himself up off the floor. The floating platform they were on was unlike the platforms they fought on for the tournament. It felt as if it could give out at any moment, sending them plummeting down into the black void that was beneath them. He could feel the suction, as the darkness seemed to beckon them closer. It called to them, wishing to swallow them whole. Hopefully, that did not happen. Alucard lunged forward, blade drawn, prepared to commit patricide. He'd done it before, and he wasn't afraid to do it again. If this bastard of a father of his wouldn't stay dead, Alucard would strike him down again and again until the old man finally learned his lesson. Dracula was not having it. Teleporting, Alucard's initial strike missed. He had anticipated this, but the complete disappearance of his father and the swishing of Eris's sword meant nothing solid still managed to make his balance falter. Letting out a gentle huff of mild annoyance, the half-vampire turned to see where Dracula had gone. Dracula reappeared behind the group of smashers. The group, too, was caught off guard as Dracula prepared an attack against them. A ball of unholy fire came from the Count's hands. "Duck!" Pac-Man shouted, diving out of the way of the ball. He landed but inches away from the bane of ghosts and bounced throughout the crowd. Screams went up as the fire licked against their skin, but, fortunately, did not make direct contact. Dracula wasn't finished, however. Raising an arm, 3 pillars of flame burst from the ground, sending the group scrambling away once again. Newt rolled away, before launching an attack of his own. However, because of the fear he had felt but moments before coming into this cursed room, it was weak. His psychic powers were not as strong as they had been before. Cursing to himself, he tried to regain his focus, but was met with the same ball of fire from before. A searing heat hit the backside of a genetic Pokemon and sent him spiraling towards the ledge. He groaned aloud, feeling the pain of the attack on his back. Newt woke. Before he could tumble away into the dark, inky abyss below, Newt felt a sudden suction. King Dedede inhaled deeply, and soon enough Newt felt himself in the disgusting wetness of King Dedede's mouth. With an exhale of his breath, Newt was flung away, landing on his face and covered in slobber. Agitated, the Pokemon stood, wiping himself clean. "Next time, let me go over the edge," Newt communicated, giving Dedede a glare. "What? Not even a lookout?" Dedede shouted, tacking Newt to the ground. If it hadn't been for him, both of them would have been headless. Dracula had missed his attack on the 2 blubbering idiots, leaving him wide open for a counter-attack. It was an opportunity that Mark didn't waste. Letting out a cry, Mark charged at the evil creature before him. He had not brought his sword to the costume party, so he was forced to use a replica of Max's cane. Jumping, Mark lunged for Dracula's head. Mark stammered, as his advance was stopped. Dracula caught Mark by the arm, and, before he could react, Mark was thrown down. Hard. Bouncing off the ground, the hotel manager rolled away from the Prince of Darkness. Dazed, Mark stared upward at the swirling blackness of the room. Was he seeing stars? Or was that just his imagination? "Mark!" Paco cried out, astonished at the attack Mark had just taken. The boy moved to rush after him, but was met by a gloved hand on his shoulder. "No!" Nana shouted in his ear. Her voice seemed hushed and intense. "He's a bad guy. Let go. He's on our team. I can't let a grudge get him killed." Paco shouted back. As much as Nana protested against it, Paco broke away and rushed over towards Mark's side, with the looming presence of the vampire lord looking over him. Diving, Paco threw up a wall of ice to prevent the incoming approach of the evil. It bought him time, but not much. Dracula's unholy fire was melting the ice at a heightened pace. "Mark!" Paco called, shaking the fallen man. "Mark! Get up!" Mark groaned, as reality slowly came back to him. Before he knew what was going on, he was hoisted up onto his feet by the small Eskimo boy. Dracula, all the while, had knocked down the icy barrier. The anger in his eyes flared hot white, and struck a fear into Paco he hadn't felt since. the guardian. Almost falling off of Icicle Mountain. Panicking, the little boy dragged Mark back towards the group. Dracula rose his arms up, summoning a swarm of bats. Screeching like the souls of the damned, the bats dove and swiped at the group of recovering smashers. Shouts and cries went up as the pests attacked. Dracula himself teleported about the battlefield, causing as much chaos as he could. Chaos was his mind, after all. What do we do? Little Mac cried out, his voice cracking with fear. His boxing gloves were up in defensive position, as he swiped the bats out of the sky with varying degrees of success. He's running a train on us, and we've not even scratched him yet. Lucas cried out, covering his head as a nasty bat caught him right on the cheek. Warm blood began to trickle down his cheek as more bats began to swarm and overwhelm the poor boy. If it wasn't for Ness and his part thunder, Lucas might as well have been carried off by them to whatever unholy place of origin they had come from. Go for the head. Richter, Simon, and Alucard all shouted in scary unison. The three hunters were having a hard time keeping the threats at bay. It was quite obvious that it had been a while since any of the three of them had dealt with Dracula and his demonic ways. That, and Simon and Richter themselves were suffering some pretty nasty effects of being in the presence of the Dark Lord for so long. Richter could hardly see straight as the pounding of his head drowned out most things that happened around him. Simon's every breath was labored, as his cursed side seemed to flare hotter and hotter with indescribable pain. Alucard sliced down another sword, and his eyes turned back towards his father. Rosalina didn't need to be told wise. The mother of the Loomis was doing her best to attack Dracula's only weak point. However, she alone couldn't do it. Another sweltering wave of energy exploded from Dracula's fingertips, and Rosalina was tossed backward, floating inches away from the edge of the hellish room. Bayonetta joined in on the assault, just as Rosalina was tossed away. The Umbral Witch let out a cry of terror as she summoned Gamora's arm. The demon, taking on the form of Bayonetta's own hair, lashed outward, but was seemingly hesitant to do any damage. Dracula radiated a demonic energy much like his own. Dracula, however, wasn't so hesitant. Bayonetta cried out as Dracula grabbed her hair, slamming it down into the ground before tossing her toward the ledge. Bayonetta rolled, her hair quickly returning to cover the areas of her body that had been exposed, before landing on her feet and charging forward again with her guns loaded. Jumping into the air, Dracula was unable to stop the hail of bullets that rained down directly onto his head. For the first time, it seemed as if the Prince of Evil was taking a hit. An arm went up to cover his head, but the damage had been done. A few shots rang against Dracula's head, and he let out a soft sound of pain. He flinched slightly, before teleporting across the battlefield. "All right," Isaac cried out, tending to a hurting Incineroar. Little Mac was not far off, but was too terrified of the heights to do much of anything. "More of that, please." "That's the plan, dingbat," Dr. Mario called out. He reached into his coat pocket for another flask. Grabbing a potion of strength, he prepared to take it. Before the blue eyes of Jigglypuff's terrified eyes met his own, Doc unscrewed the cap, hesitated, and gave it to the scared Pokemon. "Here. Go get him, champ." Jigglypuff downed the potion, before burping. All at once, the timid Pokemon's fear disappeared. Angrily, the puffball puffed out her chest, before turning to see where Dracula had gone. "Jiggly!" she cried out, before hopping after him. Dr. Mario wiped a tear out of his eye. I''M.M.A. So proud. Waluigi and Wario tossed everything they had at the vampire. Stolen bob-ombs, old video games, golden coins. The two thieves spared no punches, as they tried their hardest to take out the Count. "I got it," Wario suddenly shouted. "What?" Waluigi asked, before seeing what Wario had in his hand. A single, whole clove of rotten garlic. In an instant, Wario downed it. A cloud of gas flowed from Wario's behind, as he spun in a circle. Laughing the whole time, Wario knew exactly what he would become. Wario Man. Wahaha. Wario Man laughed, holding his stomach. It growled angrily at him. But Wario Man didn't care. He had a vampire to kill. Like a cat lit on fire, Wario Man charged. Dracula was caught off guard by the Pudgeball superhero, and was unable to protect himself from the royal pummeling Wario Man gave his face. Letting out small groans, Dracula countered as best as he could. Which wasn't that great. "Now's our chance," Pac-Man called, rushing in. He waved an arm to the others. "It's now or never." With the troops rallied, the assault came to be. Dracula took a defensive stance, but was soon overwhelmed by the foes that were battering against him. Ness and Lucas shot PSI energy directly into his head. Ridley and Pitch used the elements of plasma and electricity to attack Dracula. Jigglypuff battered against him with her stubby little arms. Enough, Dracula shouted, pushing everyone away. Unnatural blood pooled around his head, as the effects of the beatings were shown. Flicking his cape once more, Dracula drowned the whole floating throne room in complete, inky blackness. Stay wary, Muto told the others. This is another of his tricks. Do not move. The edges are still all around us, and lead to impending death. Thanks for the reassuring words, Ridley responded, like a smartass. Keep that up and you'll be the one going over, Muto clapped back. Richter. Annette? Richter shouted back, the voice sounding so real. Rapidly, the vampire hunter turned to see if he could spot where the voice had come from. But all around him, there was nothing. Richter? What are you shouting about? Lucina asked. Richter, please. Hey, Annette. I have got you. Richter shouted. His feet began to move, even if he couldn't tell where he was going. Please, Richter. Simon called. Stay vigilant. It's another of this heathen's tricks. She's gone. Bayonetta yelled. This made Richter stop. Richter, save me. Richter. Richter. She was gone. He needed to accept this for himself. Suddenly, Richter felt a hard kick to his back. And then, he was falling. He shouted out loud, as he fell at the very edge of the stage. He'd been here before. Many times. He'd fallen too many times to count during the tournaments. But never before had he felt as if his life was actually in danger. He always knew that once he fell, he'd be brought back to the fight in a few moments by the announcer in the hands. Time slowed down as gravity took him. There was no announcer here to save him. No master hand. This was it. The void was taking him. Was he okay with this? He supposed so. Hopefully the others would be. A hand. A hand stopped his descent. A hand made of psychic energy. Isaac, seen through the darkness, created a platform for the falling man. Grunting, he pulled up, focusing all of his energy into saving his friend. Behind him, a dark presence loomed. Dracula, in the darkness, moved to give Isaac a similar fate. His hand reached down to strangle the young boy and toss him aside. His fingers grappled the backside of Isaac's cape. A cry escaped Dracula's lips, as the telltale sheen of a sword sliced him above the temple. Falling to his knees, Dracula huffed heavily. As Isaac brought Richter back ashore, the light in the room began to come back. Lucina held the holy falchion high. Dracula had been struck down by her hand. The darkness was slowly starting to fade, as Dracula, too, was beginning to disappear. Back to ash. To dust. To nothing. Once again, I am defeated, Dracula muttered weakly. He spat out black blood. His white teeth were stained by the inky darkness seeping out of his face. Impossible. After all I planned to do. Your will is evil, Alucard rebutted, sheathing his sword. The just will always triumph over the unjust. You and your undead army are not wanted here, nor needed. Enjoy your death. You've certainly gotten what you deserve. Ridley hacked a loogie at the dying man to add insult to injury. Dracula sputtered a laugh. As long as evil lives in the hearts of men, I will return. Dracula promised them. His eyes, laden with blood, looked up to the one who had struck him down. You and I. We could have ruled the never-ending multiverse together. But you resisted. I'd never serve the likes of you, Lucina huffed back. Her sword dripped of the dying vampire's blood. How she knew where he was in the darkness was beyond her. But her blade found its mark. She was just happy it didn't find her comrades instead. So be it, Dracula told her. In that case, allow me to give you one final treat, this All Hallows Eve. Observe. The last form you'll ever take. Transforming quickly, Dracula took many terrifying forms. Unholy monsters from other dimensions. Deep-seated fears. Gored loved ones. Finally, Dracula settled on Lucina herself, taking the form of the blue-haired princess. The blood trickled from his face, and he held a mortified expression on his face. He screamed a shrill shriek in Lucina's voice. Before collapsing to the floor. The still body seeped into the floor, before dispensing into more black blood. The room stopped its floating. And soon, the Smashers found themselves back where they had been before. Not in space, but in a massive throne room with blood coating the walls and ceiling. The Smashers, mortified and terrified beyond words, looked down at the pile of blood that used to be Dracula with Lucina's body. Lucina herself looked as if she were going to be sick. All of the color was out of her face. Pale and shaky, she slowly moved to sheath her sword. Sans, with a bagel in one hand, offered a shrug and broke the silence. Wow. Good luck sleeping tonight. That was pretty messed up, huh? Before anyone could respond and chastise the skeletal figure, the fake hotel began to shake. Ornaments began to tumble. A piece of the ceiling almost squished Pichu and Ridley. King Dedede let out a startled sound of pain as a piece of a pillar toppled over and hit him on the head. Richter and Simon made eye contact. They needed to flee. Now. Are you okay? Terry placed a hand on Robin's shoulder, as the ragtag group of freedom fighters escaped to the outside world. The demons of the night seemed to be retreating, as the sun began to poke out over the horizon. It was a miracle to see. Had something happened that they didn't know of? Had the evil been defeated? Robin weakly nodded her head. Why? Yes. I believe I'll be okay. The tactician had a massive gash in her side from her brush with death. She had patched it up as well as she could given the circumstances, but would definitely need to seek medical attention at the next possible opportunity. If she had that opportunity. Other smashers had fought their way out onto the lawn, tipped off from Max's announcement. From her spot in the grass, Robin could see Shulk and Pit fighting off a handful of straggling skeletons. Vaguely, she wondered what had become of the awful creature that had attacked Carter. Carter. Her head slowly turned towards the other. The young man looked peaceful in his knockout state. Maybe too peaceful for what had just happened. Softly, she let out a groan, as another hit of pain made its round through her body. Careful, Marth told her. You're hurt bad. How is Carter? Robin asked, ignoring the Hero King. This was unlike her. Usually, she hung on to every word Marth spoke. Female Karn bit at her bottom lip. Not great. He's alive. But hurt. That monster did a lot of damage. Crumb commented, rubbing at his arm. He was awfully heroic throwing himself in front of it like that. Awfully stupid is what he is. Robin huffed, before groaning again. Gently, she cursed. Why on earth would he do something like that? Her thoughts were cut short, as a loud boom filled her eardrums. Unhand me, you idiots. Max shouted out, struggling against the monsters who had him. They had beaten him up awfully well, but his spirit remained unbroken. Nothing hurt more than the reality he lived in, that was for sure. Don't you know what he's planning? You've got to get out of here if you don't want to get killed again. This whole place is on the brink. The monsters didn't even give him a look back. Don't make me, Max huffed. He's going to. Boom. Max hardly had time to react before a new wave of information hit him. He wildly looked around, pleadingly. Let me out of here. Max cried. Boom. You can't do this. He insisted. Boom. I won't allow it. I'll go rouge again. The Lord of Knowledge insisted. But it was too late. The plan was already rolling. What plan? Max cried. I'm going to. All at once, the entire hotel began to crumble and collapse in on itself. Down the building fell. With Max still trapped inside, as the hotel crumbled into bits, so did Dracula's Castlevania. Simon, Richter and Alucard guided their group of misfits through the winding corridors, dashing here and there to find the coveted exit. Popo tugged Mark along, who was still rather loopy from the hard hit he had taken during the final battle. Sans, who was too lazy to keep up with the other smashers, hitched a ride on Ridley's back, and was making idle prater with Pichu, as nonsensical as it was. Wario, exhausted of his Wario Man form, charged forward, shoulder slamming anything that seemed to be in his way. It took some doing, but the ragtag group found their way out moments before the entire castle fell in on itself. Crumbling, the castle fell to the earth with a mighty boom, sending a wave of dust onto those who had just escaped the clutches of Dracula. It seemed as if a spirit of darkness escaped from the castle, too, and skyrocketed up into space. The sun was beginning to poke its head out of the orange sky, shining light onto the depressing atmosphere that Dracula had brought with him. Here comes the sun, Lucina pointed out, her voice exhausted and relieved at the same time. They had survived. Met the summit of a massive mountain and then surpassed it. It's all going to be okay. Pac-Man muttered, before sputtering a laugh. We're okay. Richter gave Isaac a small, thankful punch to the shoulder. You really saved my skin back there. Isaac, rubbing at his arm and shyly looking away, offered a small smile. Hey, don't mention it. I didn't want you falling into that weird void. The boy paused, and it isn't like I did anything crazy. I just stopped a comrade from falling. It was those guys who gave the vampire a kick in the pants. Isaac gestured to where Lucina, Alucard, Simon and Bayonetta stood. A golden ray of sunshine seemed to spotlight entirely on Lucina, who was having a somber conversation with Alucard. She looked heavenly despite having recently been through hell. The sight made Richter smile faintly, before lowering his eyes and looking away. Don't discount yourself, Richter told the other, before slapping a hand on his back. You're just as much a part of this team as the rest of us. And because of that, I'm going to buy you a nice meal. Really? Isaac asked, perking up at the offer. Yes, really. Welp, that was one fucked up day, Ridley suddenly said, scratching at the wounds he had on his head. It felt like it took damn near a month. I'm ready to sleep for 1,000,000 years and never think about Halloween ever again. Technically speaking, it's been 27 days, Sans piped in, before shrugging. But who's counting? I second the sleeping, Mac muttered. I can't wait to get back to the hotel. You might want to hold that thought, a voice suddenly said, making those around it tense up considerably. Still very much on edge, many smashers grabbed for their weapons to take out the hostile voice. The surprise on their face was great when they realized it was only Sheik. When'd you get here? Waluigi asked. Are you one of them mimic monsters? I'll end you. No, I'm Sheik, Sheik answered, keeping the book close to her side, and I've been here for a while. After I lost sight of you and Dr. Mario, I found an exit of my own. You were following us? Doc asked, confused. She's a ninja, genius. Obviously she didn't want you seeing that, little Mac answered, with a small eye roll. We wanted to make sure you two didn't die. We're plenty capable. Waluigi interrupted. I''m.a. Not dead yet, am I? By some miracle of science, Dr. Mario hummed. Jigglypuff giggled at that, shaking her head lightly. Waluigi gave an eye roll. What do you mean hold the thought? Mark asked, comprehending what Sheik had said. Sheik pursed her lips under her mask. You should see for yourself. Gesturing off and into the open country where the Smash Hotel once resided, there lay only ruin. Where the massive hotel once stood was nothing more than the scattered remains of a hotel that had been destroyed by the monsters of the night. Gazing upon it, Mark suddenly got an awful feeling in the pit of his stomach. Max. The damage was immense. No part of the building was left standing. Drywall and the remains of rooms lay skewed all across the lawn. Smashers who had escaped the wreckage were left to pluck through it to see what was left of their possessions. Somberly, Dark Pit reached down into the wreckage and brought up the remains of an old acoustic guitar. The instrument was mangled and torn. It was hardly recognizable as his own, but it had to be. A finger ran across one of the strings, but no sound was produced from it. Sighing, Dark Pit threw the guitar, and threw it hard. It shattered into splinters, and he felt as if another part of his soul had been ripped from him. It was just a stupid instrument, but it was his. This damn dimension was trying to take everything he had, wasn't it? Other smashers were more frantic. Meatball? Meatball? Luigi's cries echoed across the plain, sending shivers down spines left and right. The desperation and panic in the plumber's voice was almost unheard of. It was something taken directly out of a pasta-themed horror movie, as Luigi dug around the remains of the hotel in search of his faithful pet. There was no sign of her anywhere. She's gotta be around here! Somewhere. Daisy groaned, shoving a large part of the hotel out of the way. What was left of the rec room left no answers. The TV was smashed to bits, and the arcade machine that Pit had so happily taken the high scoring was no more. Meatball. Luigi cried again, using his poltergust GOO to sweep away some of the mess. He could feel his heart about ready to burst as it pounded against his ribs. Hot tears threatened to tumble from his eyes as his search seemed to be in vain. Then, his foot met something squishy. Looking down, the green plumber saw a sickly green goop pulled around his feet. He recognized the goop, as any father to a goo version of themselves would. Gooigi? Luigi looked at the goo, as it began to materialize. It was not in the shape of Gooigi, no, but took the form of a solid block of goo. Pushing aside a window that had fallen in on it, Luigi could see that Gooigi was protecting something within itself. Or rather, someone. Taking shape as Gooigi once again, Gooigi slowly unfurled himself. In his arms, he held the sleeping form of a certain calico cat, who was immune to the effects of the tumbling hotel and kept safe within the gooey body of Gooigi. Meatball was safe. What's Daisy asked, before seeing the goo plumber hand the real Luigi the sleeping cat. Luigi proceeded to hug Meatball close to his chest, before diving forward to hug Gooigi. The sight was so wholesome that Daisy herself felt like crying. Others were not so lucky with their loved ones. Master Mario? You may want to see this. Mario asked, turning his head towards Cappy, who was floating over a specific area of debris. The man in red slowly moved to be by Cappy's side, unsure if he was prepared to see what was before him. He wasn't. Gently, Mario stooped down to pick up the busted-up remains of Flood. The water hose sparked and flickered, whirring softly in Mario's hand. A soft beeping could be heard, warning of a system malfunction. The glass was broken at the base of the device, and the nozzle was bent in such a way that it was hardly recognizable as the friend Mario had once held on his back. Mario felt emotion welling up in himself. He lost a friend. Despite his better judgment, he hugged the hose to his body tightly, and let a tear or two escape from his usually joyful eyes. A shock radiated through him, but he didn't care. I''M.M.A. Gonna fix you up. Mario promised Flood. You'll be as good as new. It was a promise Mario intended to keep. In another part of the destroyed hotel, other smashers poked around. Cloud was more than a little distraught by the loss of his motorcycle, screaming out a paragraph worth of Japanese swear words. Marth covered Crom's ears, and shook his head disapprovingly at the angry man. Cloud, in a fit of anger and grieving, kicked a chunk of debris away. And then, the pile began to move. A shouting man covered from head to toe in soot emerged from the pile. Cuts and scratches covered his face as he fought tooth and nail to get out of his unholy prison. It startled those around him, but he didn't care. In his arms, the shouting man held another. Snake? Cloud asked, surprised. He recognized the shouting from a match the two had had a few days earlier. What on earth? No time, Snake barked. Need medical attention. The form of a man was held tightly in Snake's arms. Milky white hair draped over his face, and a long, flowing robe dragged across the floor as Snake struggled to carry him. A gaggle of Inklings came out from the pile of rubble in their squid form, looking shook to the bone. Orange and Blue helped Snake carry the young man, holding his legs upward to allow Snake to trudge out of the hole. Robin? Marth gasped, removing his hands from Crom's ears. What happened? We were escaping together, Snake started, gesturing to his squid children and the tactician. When the walls started coming down, Robin here, like a true soldier, threw himself over the Inklings and took a nasty bump in the head. He's out cold. Sylve looked about ready to cry again, as she hugged Snake's leg tightly. Lime and Lemon had put aside their differences in the time of need and rounded the other Inklings up in a tight bundle. Cyan was crying, while Pink and Violet tried to calm him down. Will he be okay? Ken asked. I hope so, but I'm no medic. Where's Dr. Mario? Snake asked, looking around the fallen hellscape. Their answer was coming running over the hillside. Mark led the charge, as those who had been trapped in Dracula's Castlevania rushed to be with those dealing with the fallen hotel. Max opened his eyes to the void again. It was a usual place for him to be, really, but for some reason it felt different. Breathing here felt harder than it usually did. It was colder. Idly, Max moved to wrap his own arms around himself, as he stared out into the empty nothingness. This was your plan? He shouted to no one in particular. Huffing, he lounged backward. Please, I'm getting so used to these void chapters that it's getting boring. But it wasn't his void. And that was scary. For what felt like forever, Max floated around aimlessly. With no goal in sight and nothing to do, the void consumed him. It was terrifying. Suddenly, a thought came to Max. No, he wouldn't. Max muttered. He shook his head. I have plot armor. He'd never pull a move like that on me. Too risky. He would upset too many people. I'm well liked. You saw what happened when Core died. Died. Was he dead? No, I'm not dead. Max protested, and if this is your view of the afterlife, it's really sad. Again, there was nothing. Just a cold, empty void with a sad, empty man inside of it contemplating his own existence. Again. Was he dead? I'm not dead, Max shouted, trying to convince himself at this point. He can't kill me. He can't. He wouldn't dare. 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 The word echoed, and Max found it harder and harder to convince himself that he wasn't dead. Was he dead? He had hardly been alive. How could he die? How could he end up like? Shut up, shut up, shut up, Max shouted. For being a void, it was really loud in here. Sir. Was he dead? Max's hands went to his head, as he desperately tried to keep himself together. He wasn't dead. He couldn't be dead. Did he want to live? The new question hit him. Before, he'd felt nothing with being alive. He felt empty. He knew nothing that happened mattered. But through Mark his brother he found a meaning to exist even through this non-existence. He'd wanted to die so badly, and now that he was here at the brink of death, he yearned to live. Rather indecisive. Ah. I want to live, Max said to no one. I want to live. I want to live with Mark. I'd rather fake being alive than be subject to the void for the rest of my endless existence. I won't die if I die. I'll end up in the void forever. I want to fake being alive. I want to live. The void filled with light. Blinding light. The darkness was chased out so fast that Max would have went blind if he wasn't wearing sunglasses. A voice. There was a voice. Faint. But a voice. Max. It called. Max couldn't say anything back. Max. It called again, slightly louder. Max opened his mouth, but no words came out. Max. Suddenly, a new light hit his eyes, as the light of reality began to wash over him. Gone was the void. And in its place was the very man he wanted light for. Mark. Max muttered softly, before groaning. Dull pain was all over his body, and was the most intense in his legs. It wasn't much, but when feeling anything was rare, it was intense. Softly, he moved to give his brother a hug. To which Mark was surprised but not opposed. The two brothers hugged tightly. Mark had pulled Max out of the debris as soon as he made it to the site. He dug for his brother, and was relieved as all hell when he found him. The two embraced, sharing in the moment. They had chosen life. Once the hug concluded, Max moved to stand, but found himself unable to. The pain in his legs flared, and forced him to stay right where he was. Gritting his teeth, Max looked up at his brother, who understood the message. Mark, nodding gently, stooped again to pick the other up. Reunited at last. But not in the most optimal of conditions. The hotel was in shambles all around them. Smashers left and right plucked through the remains to salvage anything they could. They were homeless. This has all been very touching, Ridley said, having watched the whole thing go down between the two brothers. But what the hell do we do now? We've got nowhere to go. Mark and Max made brief eye contact, before looking elsewhere. Mark looked off toward Morton's Point, while Max looked up at the sky. Max started, before stopping. Ridley rose an impatient eyebrow. We're going to have to find somewhere else to live for a while, Mark said. All 100+ of us. The orange of the sky was chased away by the softly rising sun. The golden beams penetrated through the darkness and promised that everything was going to be okay. For once, Max was grateful to be alive. Even if he was, essentially, homeless. FSK. TSK. Whoosh. Snake patted his hands together, as the campfire began to consume the tinder. Being that he was now homeless, he supposed he'd do what he did best. Rough it out in the wilderness. Taking a lopsided frying pan he'd salvaged from the wreckage of the hotel, Snake began to cook up some collard greens plucked from around the forest. The sizzling plants hit Snake's nose. Wafting it towards himself, he took in the aroma. At least it smelled edible. Hey, survivalists couldn't be choosers. Silver, orange, blue, and cyan did their best to help Snake out, grabbing wild plants that looked good enough to them. Excitedly, the young squids tossed the greens into the lumpy frying pan. Nodding his head to the children, Snake thanked them for their contribution, mentally psyching himself up for the disgusting thing he was about to be forced to eat. Are mushrooms supposed to be that color? Snake mumbled to himself, looking at the sickly-looking mushroom Orange had found at the base of the tree. I don't think so. Good luck with that one, Chief, Samus quipped from her spot on a log, not helping at all. Instead, she sat polishing her helmet. The bulky suit could use a cleaning. The path they had taken out into this part of the forest was not that clean. Lifting the helmet upwards, Samus looked into the visor and saw her reflection. She nodded, before placing the helmet under her arm again. Tell me again why we decided to go this deep into the forest again? We need supplies, Snake remarked. The plains behind what's left of the hotel wouldn't do anything for us. Too many bugs and not enough meat and greens. Out here, we're safe from the elements, but at an increased risk of animal attack, Wolf muttered, swatting at a rather large mosquito that had landed on his arm. He had missed, and the bug went away to bother someone else. The apex predator sighed softly, shaking his head. He hated camping. Isabel, however, did not. Oh, come on. It'll be fun. Isabel chirped, using a broom to swat a spiderweb from the trees. The stingy spider house landed on Wolf, who groaned before haphazardly shooing it away. Isabel giggled slightly at his reaction, before continuing her sweeping. There sure were a lot of spider webs out here in the wilderness. Besides, we've got to make the most of our situation. The hotel might be gone, but at least we're all still alive. Except Robin, Samus mused. She simply shrugged off the looks she'd been given from the others. She thought it was funny. Robin'll be fine, Snake reassured. Sylph threw a live spider into the pan, which sizzled up like the rest of the things being cooked. Poor thing. But at least there would be a little protein in the diet. Doc took him with him to Mark's house. We could have gone to Mark's house? Wolf all but shouted. Why would we want to go out in the stupid wilderness when we could be safe and sound at Mark's? Or anywhere with a working heating system? For a wolf, you sure don't like being outside, Samus tittered. Again, she shrugged off the glare Wolf gave her. It'll be fine, Wolf. Don't worry. Isabelle reassured, giving her significant other a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. He seemed so tense. The kids sure seemed to like it out here. She was right. Vil had already begun to build himself a tiny house from trees he chopped down, while Pammy and Petunia played in the dirt. Bee was making Oliver do her work, while Craig prodded a sleeping Thomas. Thomas's wool lip bleated softly, before turning away from the other. The sight made Wolf smile slightly to himself, before turning his eyes away, I guess. But I'm still not going to like it out here. When's food going to be ready? What do you call food? Snake asked. He flicked the greens and spider around in the pan, pursing his lips, because we don't have much right now. Pika Pika? Pikachu asked, making his reappearance among the group. In his hands, he held a delicious-looking platter of mushrooms and fruits, and was happily gouging himself with it. Whoa! Where'd you get that, Pikachu? Samus exclaimed to her yellow, furry friend. It looked, and smelled, delicious. Pikachu. Pikachu beamed, pointing behind himself with his tail. Looking beyond the yellow mouse, Samus saw a gently raising bout of smoke. Atop a campfire sat a roasting pot, and around the roasting pot sat a handful of other smashers, and that's when Ike spilled all of the beans. Roy exclaimed through a mouthful of curry, hardly stopping his laughter long enough to chew. To his left sat Princess Zelda, who was laughing like no one had ever seen her laugh before, covering her mouth with her hands to stop her own food from spilling out all over the dirt path. Link, standing over and stirring the pot, couldn't help the smile that came to his face. He made eye contact with Shulk, who sat on a log adjacent to the others, sipping at a mug of warm milk. There were a lot of beans, Ike said, trying to stand up for himself. Apparently, Clown smirked, his arms crossed and his head shaking. I remember you laying on the floor surrounded by all these beans. You just looked up at me and said I can't do this anymore. Cloud. Oh, that's a riot. 8 exclaimed, laughing so hard he fell off of his log backward. Munchie held tightly to his pocket as the hero went tumbling backward, squeaking out fearful words. It was. There were a lot of beans. Remind me not to tell you any secrets, Luminary hummed, making a few of the others chuckle. Taking a bite of his rice, Luminary was quite impressed. MMH, this is some good stuff, Link. Where did you learn to cook? School for the Wild, Shulk answered, to a few positive responses. Link gave a thumbs up. All he needed was a chef hat and he'd look like a world-class chef. Oh my goodness. Zelda gasped, finding it hard to find her breath. The story Roy had told was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. She was having a hard time keeping it together. It wasn't that funny. I groaned. Yes it was, Shulk responded, a cheeky grin spreading under his milk mustache. Snake, having watched this whole thing go down, dropped his pan of greens. The hot pan landed on his bad leg, and made the survivalist shout out in pain. Can we go over there? Wolf asked. The idea was followed by a resounding yes. The Smash Motel was crowded, to say the least. Why is it that whenever some bad shit happens, you Smashers always come back to us? Shadow asked, his voice laden with absolute distaste. Doesn't our life suck enough as is? Just let us live in our shitty motel in peace. We'd love to let that happen, but we're kind of homeless right now. Bowser responded, his arms crossed and his foot tapping. Now then, do you have room for 6 little bastards and 2 angel children, or are we going to have a problem? An uproar went up among the Kooplings as they all argued about who were the bastards and who were the angels. Bowser smiled an evil smile. They were all bastards, but he loved causing discourse. We's got room, boss. Hammer Bro exclaimed happily. You fellas can stick with me and my bro. There's 2 of you? Bowser asked. Well, duh. A second Hammer Bro exclaimed. Weren't it obvious? Without 2 of us, we aren't Hammer Brothers. We're Hammer Bro. Bro, the first Hammer Bro broed. That's deep. Bro, I know, bro, the second bro broed. Just show us to our rooms, Bowser groaned, rubbing at his head. This was going to be a long visit. As Bowser began to leave with his 8 children in tow, Phosphora flew above, as jittery as a Junebug. Isn't this just so exciting? We haven't had this many visitors since the invasion. Exciting isn't the word I'd use for it, Shadow groaned, rubbing at his temples. It's the one I'd use. And hey, Alucard is back. Isn't that even better? Phosphor continued, waving happily at the half-vampire. Hiya, Alucard. I'm going to sleep, Alucard muttered, a hand holding his head. Killing Dracula always made him very, very sleepy. Don't wake me up for any reason. Wow, someone's moody, Phosphor amused, coming down to rest beside Shadow. Wonder what got into him? I hear he had to kill his dad, Ken added, sliding up to the table. Alongside him strode Marth, Crom, Terry, and Guile. The 5 men all held bubbly sodas in their hands. For 4 of them, it was a way to drink away the trauma they had just endured. That sucks, Phosphor pouted. Poor guy. I hope he's doing okay. It wouldn't suck if you knew his dad, Crom shrugged, cracking open his cold one. You'd want him dead, too. Patricide's got to be rather tiring, though, Marth added, but yes. I'd want Count Dracula dead, too. Good thing he is dead, Terry said definitively. You don't know that, Marth remarked. The undead army is gone, yes, but Dracula could always come back, Yola, Crom added. It sent an uproar of laughter throughout the dads, leaving Marth standing confused and somewhat insulted. I don't understand, Marth muttered. Don't worry sport, you'll get it when you're older, Terry grinned. Shadow slammed his head into the table. He hated this already. Why here? And why were there so many of them? Nora? Honey, I'm home. Nora heard the calling of her husband and was surprised. She hadn't expected him to be home so soon. The hotel had him working ridiculous hours. Had he somehow managed to swindle some time off from the hands? She didn't really care that much, though. Any time Mark could be home was a blessing in and of itself. Oop. Coming. Give me a moment. Having just sent Carl to the shower, he was covered in enough dirt to fill an entire city block. Nora began to come down the stairs. She was excited beyond belief to hear of Mark's return home. As she came down the stairs, however, she could see that something was wrong. There was a fear that hit her, as she saw the giant purple space dragon that stood behind her husband, who was carrying himself. And why was he dressed like that? The shock must have been visible on her face, as Mark was quick to explain the situation and the parade of people behind him. Gently, he laid Max in a chair, before rubbing the back of his head. Hey Nora. You remember the hotel? With all the smashers? It kind of doesn't exist anymore. And everyone that lived in it is now homeless. Nora took a moment to breathe, closing her eyes for a moment. The emerald eyes closed for a brief moment, as a hand pressed against her heart. Nora wasn't a woman to let the appearance of a situation get the best of her. She prided herself in her logical thinking and her rationalization. Hell, that rationalization was what helped her cope with Mark being out of the house so often. She could think this through and make a good conclusion out of it. Nora let out an exhale, before opening her eyes again. What do you mean the hotel?